Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am joined today by the Bunny Blackwell, and we're going to be talking about all of the wonderful forbidden topics that are no doubt going to get us fitted for a very fetching set of SS uniforms, and we will be told to go and man the gas chambers. Because apparently that's what happens whenever you talk about these subjects. So, hello, Bunny.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's nice to be back in the stirrups. Saddle. I meant saddle. But yes, thank you for having me. And as long as Hugo Boss designs it, I'm a designer whore. I'm on board.
All right, sounds pretty legit.
I just left. FYI for the tailor waiting in the wings. So.
All right.
More information. More information than you needed. Go ahead.
Yes. That's what I'm going to say on that one. Things that are not necessary for me to know, but that chat will have some sort of explosion over, because of course they do.
Hi, chat. Love you.
Oh, please don't tempt them. You're making it worse.
I always do.
Alright, so today we are going to be talking about all of the forbidden topics, namely IQ, IQ testing, IQ heritability, the Big Five personality trait, and then we're going to be linking it to genetics, and quite possibly talking about a little bit about some genetic populations as well. So be prepared for some of the more rational people out there to start crying racist, eugenics, evolution stops at the neck, and other fallacious reasoning.
And don't hurt people's feelings.
Yes.
Because we're all equal on the inside, Teal.
It's true. It is true. There is no way that some people are just better than others. No, that's crazy. Crazy talk.
It's true. It's true. My heart is growing 3 sizes. We should just ban any sort of cognitive testing because it makes people feel bad. There you go.
Absolutely.
Oh, and anyone listening to this, you may actually be coming to hell with us just for listening. So you've been warned. You've been warned.
Because what has been heard is strong.
Yeah. And what has been heard cannot be unheard. So there you go. You've been warned. 3, 2, 1. You're still here. Good. Okay.
Excellent. Nice to know that you're all on board with hearing about all of the things that will make people uncomfortable. So I think we're going to start off with the IQ and all of that sort of stuff. And well, I have been very reliably told in the comments of my last video, where I did mention IQ being largely hereditary, that no, IQ is subjective. It's not largely hereditary. You can train yourself to win at IQ tests and other things like that. And I just kind of read these comments as like, I know the person or some of the people that you got this information off of, and they are so painfully wrong that it actually hurts.
I would agree. I don't get quite so much, of course, because I'm only on Minds now, and honestly, I don't get a lot of shit posting or trolls. Even people who comment to challenge me are pretty well thought out. So I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying my little Minds paradise before it all goes to shit, as it inevitably will. But yeah, the whole you can study and learn for IQ tests, I have no doubt you can, if you set out to do that. But that is not the intention of the IQ test. And I think that's a distinction that needs to be made. The IQ tests they're not supposed to be things that you study for. You don't even know what you got right and what you got wrong, having undergone them professionally for several years. Yeah. I was never told what I got right and what I got wrong. I wasn't even sometimes given a number. It was like a percentile kind of thing, and recommendations that followed it. But the problem is, with the availability of information on the internet and these things being leaked, you can effectively study for them, but your results will be useless if you do that. It's not a measure of what you learn. It's a measure of what you, in a raw capacity, can put together. It's data synthesis effectively. And yeah, so do you want to go into the history of IQ tests for people who might not know?
A little bit, but
Sure.
first I'm gonna sort of do something a little bit different. This will just be me kind of talking for maybe about 5 minutes or something like that, because I also want to address another sort of little fallacious piece of reasoning that comes up, and it's the typical below-the-neck fallacy. You know, the idea that the brain and the body, no, they're totally not connected or anything like that. Brain is different, it's separate, and yeah.
That the brain is not effectively, and frankly, the central nervous system in general is not essentially a hunk of meat.
Yeah, pretty much.
Even though it is, so yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a little thingamadoo, which I'm just going to sort of read through, if that's okay, because
Thingamadoo is a very technical term, Teal.
It is, absolutely. This is why this is why I am such a highly sought after academic, because I use all of the big terms.
Love it. Okay, go ahead. What's your thingamadoo?
Yes, my thingamadoo. So let's sort of demonstrate just how linked the body and the brain is, and all of the nervous system and all of that stuff. So obviously we're going to be doing a little bit more of the biopsychology side, and sort of addressing a little bit of personality neuroscience as well. So the brain is part of your body, but it's not separate from your body. If you look at any image of the nervous system or anything like that, you'll see nerves leading all the way to every corner of your body. These are all connected to your spine and your brain like roots of a plant. They all carry data to and from the brain. So it's kind of more correct to think of the brain as being a sort of throughout the body thing, but with one kind of large area in the head that facilitates some of the more complex tasks.
Like Krang.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yay!
So let's go with that. And then on top of that, there are also several plexi of nerves through the body, and those are just really sort of big nerve clusters where lots of processing gets done, kind of independent of the brain. In fact, some of them are very independent from the brain, and we'll get to that shortly. So the brain is obviously one of the big plexi, and the most obvious, or the big plexus that lots of people sort of think of immediately. You've also got the lumbar plexus, which is in the lower back, the sacral plexus, which is in, again, just a little bit below that in the lower back there. There's the nerve cluster, which everyone knows about, which is the solar plexus nerve cluster as well, which is located, as everyone sort of knows, kind of just sort of underneath the ribs and behind the stomach. It's actually part of the reason why when someone punches you there, you get winded, because you hit those nerves and then it causes your diaphragm to spasm. In fact,
and don't forget the vagal nerve. That's the Vulcan neck pinch one.
Yes.
Legit, actually.
It really is. It really is. That's the brachial plexus, just under the collarbone where it meets the neck, which is actually why digging a finger or a thumb in there really hurts, because you're jamming it right into all those nerves there. So one of the more interesting ones here is that there's been a lot of work done on nerves in the last few decades, and nerve clusters, and specifically the one around your guts, the enteric nervous system. And that's kind of now earned itself the nickname of the second brain, because there's actually a lot of serotonin regulation and whatnot controlled by those nerves, which really, when you think about it, makes sense, since serotonin deals with feelings of satiety and feelings of wellness and things like that. So obviously that kind of makes sense there, because it's going to be linked to signaling to stop eating, because it'll sort of give you that, oh, you know, I'm happy and full and content now, so it kind of makes sense. And about 90% of the nerves in that area send signals to the brain rather than being received from the brain, which, when you consider that it's part of the autonomic let's try and say this correctly, autonomic nervous system, makes complete sense, because you're not consciously controlling what your stomach, liver, kidneys, all that sort of stuff are doing. They're on autopilot, so it makes sense that it sends information to your brain but doesn't really receive a whole lot from it. And the interesting thing from that is looking at how much information is going there and the kind of nerves that we've got there, and again dealing with things like the serotonin systems being dealt with down there, your sort of stomach and your gut nerves are really, really highly influential on your mood and your current state of mind. So it kind of goes some ways to explaining things like why when you're nervous you get the butterfly feelings in your stomach, why when you're hungry you can get irritable and angry, and things like that. It's just sort of an innate stress response. So, further to that, the brain is not in full control of your body when it comes to processing information. Reflex arcs are a thing, and that's times when your body takes action without the need for the brain. So,
like the withdrawal reflex, for example.
Precisely. So when you put your hand on, say, a hot frying pan or something like that, you move away. But the thing is, you don't really feel the pain until a couple of seconds later. You might get an initial little sting, but after sort of a few seconds, that's when you get the really sort of deep, severe burning pain. So the thing that made you move your hand away was the reflex arc. The signal from the pain receptor in your hand didn't fire all the way to the brain in order for you to act. It got as far as your spine, and then your body took action. And then it's sort of a couple of seconds later that your brain's like, oh yeah, that was a thing. Really, really hurts. You should probably do something about that. So it all makes sense sort of from that biological perspective, and your body is actually really quite good at functioning without the brain. If you tap someone's finger, say, with a pin when the brain is basically in, like, sort of semi-shutdown mode, like when they're asleep, they'll still react to it. The enteric nervous system, which is, again, the one which controls sort of all your guts and things to do with food processing and whatnot, you can actually sever the brain's connection to that nerve cluster entirely, and all of those things will continue to function. You just won't get any sort of signal from them to your brain, but they'll all keep working. They're basically it's basically self-contained. So the autonomic nervous system is really amazing like that. You know, you breathe, your heart beats, food is being constantly pushed through your digestive tract, blood is going through all of your arteries and veins, your heart's pumping, all that cool stuff. Hormones and all sorts of other chemicals are being released and taken back up. You're not controlling any of it. You know, if suddenly there was a switch which said, everything in your body is now on manual and you have to consciously do it, you'd die, like, immediately, because you just wouldn't consciously be able to handle that many different things. So, another sort of example here of how little your brain can actually have to do with how your body works is a really interesting phenomenon called Blindsight. And it's the phenomenon where a blind person can actually still see. So it's only certain kinds of blindness that have this, but it's a really rather interesting thing. If you place them in front of someone and you say, well, tell me which hand they're holding up, and you do it several times, they'll consciously say, oh, I don't know, and they'll just make a guess. But the thing is, they will guess correctly with a higher rate of accuracy than random chance would allow. Another interesting one which was done is showing them faces on a computer screen. Now, they can't consciously see them, but if you do, like, skin conduction tests and whatnot, and various other nerve conduction tests, their body responds to, say, really, really angry faces looking at them in the same way that a person who can see them is. So what that sort of puts sort of on the table is then this idea that there are certain things to do with your biology that your brain will still access, even if you're not sort of consciously aware of it. So in the case of Blindsight, the exact mechanism isn't 100% known, but the commonality across all the hypotheses are that the brain damage which has caused the loss of sight only stops the person from consciously processing the image, but because their eye is still functioning and still wired to other areas of the brain, the brain is still being stimulated by the signal in some way. They're just kind of not consciously seeing the image as a normal person would. So all of this basically indicates that there's no way to separate brain function from the body. They are linked, just inextricably. The idea that somehow the body could evolve, but the brain is just magically stays the same and has never changed or anything like that, and there's no differences from one to the other, is ridiculous. Like, ultimately, to hold that belief in place, you've basically become a creationist. It's, at some time the human brain came into existence, and it was this way, and is always this way between people, and you can train it to be different, but ultimately they're all the same. It's weird.
Yeah. I don't think it's weird. I think it's denying everything we see around us even. And this is part of what gets me about the whole IQ debate is in everyday life, and this is anecdotal, that you don't need a degree to understand this. We can objectively see there are some people that present as more intelligent than others and are, in fact, in observation by action, quantitatively smarter. They just are. Everybody has worked with that one person who couldn't figure out how to mop a floor, So we already know there are differences in cognitive ability. But the second you measure it and put a number to it, people start going, whoa, 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 whoa. Well, I don't know about that. But all this is an extension of what we already perceive. Yeah, some people are dumb. And it's not nice to say that, but they are. And all IQ is trying to do is figure out, well, what are the metrics for determining this? And what is dumb? What is smart? What is intelligence? And I'm sure you're going to get into that because you posted about it on Minds.
Yep.
But the idea that some people are more cognitively able than others is this should be a non-starter. Why is this up for debate?
Well, I think because ultimately some people they just kind of get upset by it. Like, they don't like the idea that not all people are created equal because egalitarianism and things like that.
Dr. Peterson talks about that a bit, that because Professor Jordan Peterson has talked extensively about IQ. It is his field, and he's pointed out that psychology as a whole is moving away from these kind of metrics. And his hypothesis that he was playing with was that fundamentally it makes people with an egalitarian bent just incredibly uncomfortable. Incredibly uncomfortable. Yeah. And psychology in terms of these metrics is going more toward the touchy-feely personality traits and is moving away from IQ. And he's talked about that. So, but why are we moving away from IQ? Is it because the idea makes people uncomfortable? Or is it because the idea is flawed? Or some combination of the two, which hopefully we're going to explore in this stream. Yay. So.
Yeah, spoilers, it's basically because people are uncomfortable.
Ah, you ruined it. Ah,
I know, but I can't help myself. It just has to be done. So
you would fail the Piaget delayed gratification test. I'm just
absolutely,
saying.
Absolutely. If I can shoot something out of the air before it's even got into the air, then that's my way of doing it. It's like, no, I know where you're gonna go with this, and you're wrong. I'm putting it out there because I can't be bothered to waste my time listening to something that's just wrong to then tell you why it's wrong. Because if I let them speak, then I'm going to have to take a small potted plant hold it in front of them and just say, look, this plant has spent all damn day making oxygen. You just wasted it. I want you to apologize to this plant. Say you're sorry.
Yeah. I love nerd burns are the best burns. They're so good. Yes. No. But yeah, so we've already established that the brain and the body you can't really separate them. They're all part of the same system with nerves and stuff like that. Okay. Are we all agreed on that? That the brain is a part of the body, right? Okay.
Yep. Cool. So we're all on the same page here. Okay. So now, because brain is part of body, where does body come from? And thus, where does brain come from? Well, they come from this wonderful little thing called sexual reproduction, which, if you don't know what that is, ask a grown-up.
Call me later. No, sorry, go on. No.
Okay, so, I suppose now, because of that, we're going to talk about the heritability of IQ, because this is...
Excellent.
This is the one which, again, people get really triggered by. No, it's not heritable at all. It's certainly not majoritary heritable. Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Science disagrees entirely. But yeah. It's fine, because I've now got another little write-up here with loads of references to various studies in it. So I'm gonna be reading this, and I will put a link to them all in the box below the video when I've finished the thing. So
yeah, for my part, just before you go on, since we're talking citations, everything that I've talked about you can find on the APA. the American Psychological Association website because I vetted all of my points. And later on, we're probably going to get into a bit of historical things and evolutionary biology things, and you can track that stuff down too. So there you go.
Yep. So I mean, well, that's great that you used the APA, because so have I. So nice. We've both independently used the same sources and vetted them because it's right. Anyway, so monozygotic twins, we're going to start with them. They share 100% of genes. They are identical twins. And in them, IQ correlates to about 8.6. When they're raised in the same household, separated monozygotic twins, IQ correlates to around 7.6 when in, totally different environments. So, first of all, to note, those are both very high correlations. So, even 7.6, you take them both to completely different environments, their IQs are still going to be about 75% the same. So, that should tell you something. Environment doesn't have a massive effect on it. When environment only changes the correlation by 0.1, environment is not very significant at all. So environment alone only accounts for 0.1% of that variance in genetically identical twins. Okay, so dizygotic twins. They share 50% of their genes. The IQ correlates 0.55 in the same household, 0.35 in different households. So, I mean, what a surprise, people who share half of their genes. When you remove environmental similarities, they also share half the IQ. What a surprise. I mean, I wish I could say I was shocked.
I was going to say, someone in chat is doing imagine my shock. I'm sure they're doing the Paul Joseph Watson thing right now. I can't see the chat, hi chat, but I'm sure it's happening. So, yes.
Yeah. I might just have to give it a go, because why the hell not? When people share 100% of the genes, the correlation is 0.76. When they share 50% of their genes, the correlation is 35. When they share half of the genes of the 100%, the correlation is half. Imagine my shock.
Woo!
There we go.
That was pretty good. That's gonna be mined out. That's gonna be clipped and posted to someone's ringtone somewhere. Maybe mine, actually.
I hope so. So, normal siblings, they're not twinly or anything like that, just normal related siblings. They correlate 0.7 when they share an environment and 0.24 when they're in different environments. So, again, that sort of should tell you something. It's a weaker correlation, again, when you split them, but it's still kind of a moderate correlation when they share that environment. So again, what you're noticing is, between the environment there, it's only gone to basically 0.2 of the variance explained by environment. We're really seeing now how environment is not actually that important? So, yeah. And parent to offspring, again, is about 4.2 in the same environments and 2.4 in different. So again, environment isn't really making a huge difference. It varies from 0.1 to 0.2. Weak correlation. Environment really doesn't mean very much. So, multiple meta-analyses from the American Psychological Institute, because of course we're going there. That's one of the world's leading institutes for IQ study, has placed IQ as being about 0.45 heritable for children, and raising up to 0.75 for adults. You want to fire anything in there since you've also done the APA?
No, I'm just listening, because what we're talking about right now is just the heritability of things. When we get into the actual IQ testing metrics, we can probably talk a bit more about environmental things there, but you're establishing a baseline now of what is heritable. Yes. So that's good. Yeah.
Okay, right. So that's sort of why I thought this would be helpful to do it in this order, because brain is not separable from body. Okay, here is what body does. And then we're just kind of just shrinking the pen of objection down to the point where it's like, you got nowhere to go, just take this bullet of truth right in between the eyes. It'll be much easier. So, great.
Yep. I'm on board so far.
Excellent. So, there was another meta-analysis by Bouchard and McGew in 2003, which was writing on the importance of G, which is general intelligence, not just IQ, overall intelligence here, and linking that to genetic heritability. And they found that environmental factors accounted for about 17% of IQ variance in siblings. So, again, that's overall intelligence, not just IQ. But again, they found environment 0.17. So, again, completely in line with what we had before, where it was between 0.1 and 0.2. Okay, so we're kind of really establishing environment not very strongly related or correlated to intelligence or IQ. So,
however, just side note, saying that it's not strongly correlated is not saying it has no effect. And
yes.
I see this happen a lot where people will hear an argument and they'll say, well, you're saying environment has no effect. No, nobody says that. Murray doesn't say that in the bell curve. Nobody is saying that environment has no effect. What we are trying to do is quantify how much effect it has and how much weight it should be given. That's all that's happening here.
Yeah.
So nobody is saying
it's
environment has no effect.
Yeah, it's 0.1 to 0.2 for a reason. That's how much effect it has. It has an effect. It's just kind of a teeny tiny one compared to everything else. And since the environment contains most of everything else,
yes,
we've only got a few places left to go. So that test was actually then repeated by Delvin et al. Was a repeat of a test by Delvin et al. In 1995, and 1997b. And that was someone who was noted that they would report very conservatively on the genetic link to IQ, because they kind of weren't really a massive fan of it. But they basically found the same thing. And then, as McGew noted in 1997, we're basically at the point of centering the debate on whether IQ is 50% heritable or 70% heritable. And that was a really, really important thing. It was basically like, look, we've got all of this research, it's somewhere around 50 to 70% heritable. We now need to be talking about how much between this bracket of 20%. Because it's basically, we've kind of ruled out anything lower than this, and we've got a few things that are more questionable about higher, but that's kind of the strongest area that we should be debating in. So, I mean, that 2 decades ago, it was 50 to 70% heritable. Basically, just like, it's somewhere around here. Basically, with very few sort of questions left. So, the idea that, you know, if you're in 2017 now and it's like, no, it's not mostly heritable, you haven't read anything about IQ.
And I will add, because we're talking about IQ and the big 5 personality traits, which we'll get into for people who don't know them. If you look at the heritability rankings of the big 5 personality traits, they're lower.
I'm actually going to go on to this a little bit.
Oh, okay. I see. I had no idea. This is people think that we like talk all the time. No, I had no idea what I was walking in here. I was game. I was good game given. So
well, I have no this is why I like doing this, because we research things separately, and if we both come to similar conclusions about it, and we're using different sources, then it's like, well, what is this telling you? You know, we've not colluded on any of this stuff beforehand. It's 2 independent researchers coming up to 2 different things. Or two similar things, I should say. So, what does that say about the amount and quality of information available?
Exactly. And anybody could do this.
Yes.
I have no special key card to, you know, special information anymore. I'm out of school. I have lost that privilege. I am a scrub like everybody else now. So, anything I can find, anyone else can find.
Yeah.
So
yeah. People don't even get to hide behind that and point at me and go, "Oh, you can get all of the things." Yeah, and that doesn't make it wrong.
No, I'm now down hunting and pecking for information like everybody else. So, and I still find this stuff. So, yeah, but I'm so glad actually you're going to get into the personality traits and how they're a different metric. They're a different animal.
Yes.
And they have a lower heritability.
Yes.
So,
because that's very important, because again, I have seen some people being so very skeptical about reality that they ignore all of the research done and simply declare that personality is IQ, therefore IQ is wrong.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
We're going to destroy that very shortly. So let's move on just a little bit more here. So still on the heritability here. So Boosman et al. 1999, they published a finding breaking down by age, which was really important. And then they found genetics linked to IQ at sort of different times differently. So their breakdowns by age were 4 to 6, where they found IQ was 42% heritable. 6 to 12, where it was about 0.52. 12 to 16, where it was, again, pretty stable, about 0.52. 16 to 18 was around 0.59, and then 20 plus, which was just adult, was 0.83, which is correct partially, but there was some other research done on really old people, which was different. So, but keep that in mind now. When you hit adulthood, 0.83. You know, inheritability. Yep. So there you go.
You will become your parents. I'm sorry.
You will. So you just will, with very little variation, which I would imagine probably scares some people. But just embrace it. It's gonna happen. Relax and let it happen.
And change what you can change and accept the rest.
Yes. So Boosman et al. Also found that as you age, shared environment becomes less relevant to IQ. And that started at the age of 4 to 6, where environment was about 0.38, and it holds pretty steady up until around the age of 16, where it declines down to 0 at adulthood. So somewhere between your teenage years and adulthood, the environment has no effect. And then continues having no effect. Until you get, like, really, really, really super old, at which point, apparently, it does start having an effect again, but we'll talk about that very shortly, because it's actually quite interesting. So...
and we have to get into the Flynn Effect, of course.
Yes, we will get into the Wilson Effect and the Flynn Effect. I've actually not got the Flynn Effect in this write-up, so you can fill in that bit, so there you go. I kind of did this write-up, like, today, so... well, it wasn't the most thorough of things, and I spent too much of my time reading through all of these studies to cover everything, but again, this is why we have two people here, because it makes things like this easier, because sharing the load. Giggity.
I was just gonna say.
So, chat, both hands on the desk.
Don't listen to him, do what you want.
So, all of the findings that were there, they have all been backed up by the writings of Posthumer et al. In 2002, specifically, who actually found that genetics accounts for around 80 to 90% of IQ from the age of 18 onwards. And then they found that shared environment has 0.0 correlation to IQ from the age of 16 onwards. So that sort of study there actually found a more extreme way of going about sort of slightly more extreme things, because previously we were looking at about the 0.7, 0.75 mark for heritability. This one found 0.8 to 0.9, which is really, really strong. So genetics accounting for 0.8 to 0.9, very strong. But again, it's just one study, but we've got a lot of them here, and they're all finding, well, the previous one, the Boosman one, adulthood was 0.83, so, I mean, this is now 2 finding that, so... You can see it seems to just be sneaking up as time goes along, because you might have noticed the previous studies were sort of from the mid or early 90s. These ones are from later than that, so it's kind of going up as we refine the testing methods. Very interesting, isn't it? Almost.
And oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, almost like science is kind of a self-correcting organism that's forever sharpening its blade.
Well, that's because science is never done. The science is never settled. It can't be. So you must constantly be evaluating and refining it. That's kind of the whole fucking point. Anyway, no, I was just going to say, just to reflect back what you're saying, what your data is saying here, as far as I'm hearing, is that environmental factors may have a greater effect in childhood.
Yes.
But by the time you reach adulthood, I'm just doing a recap. I feel like the ship's computer girl now. But... Captain, there's something on the radar. But when you reach adulthood or even mid-teens, environment diminishes to the point where it's essentially insignificant.
Yep.
Okay.
So, shall we continue onwards? I noticed there's a few people in the chat even screeching.
About what?
Oh, about, do you even know when the human genome thing was? No, you don't. Fuck off, you're an idiot. It's like, we haven't even really talked about the gene mapping of IQ. That's the next segment.
Carry it away.
So you know, it's almost like you're getting fucking triggered before we've actually covered the entire thing, and are just basically looking for any excuse to dismiss what's being said. I wonder where we've seen that tactic before.
We haven't even made any conclusions yet, so yeah. we're just chewing over the data right now.
Yeah, so there's been no conclusions or anything so far. How I'm gonna be amazed. Like, how does anyone know that in like 5 minutes I'm not gonna pull out another study and be like, and this meta-analysis here showed that all of that previous stuff was completely wrong.
You would do that.
Yeah, I would do that because I am a dick, just the largest dick on the internet,
reaching to the sky.
Mm-hmm. And it's not even conceptual. That's actually how it works.
Okay, keep going.
Study jokes. Rather interestingly, IQ variance by genetics actually decreases in the very old. So you're looking at sort of around 80 plus, and can actually go as low as 0.3. And that actually makes sense, owing to the fact that by that time people are pretty much just degenerating. So the variance is actually quite aptly explained by just the aging process.
Well, homeostatic decline is a thing, so yes. Yeah.
So it actually makes complete sense that, you know, when you get really, really old, you basically kind of regress back to similar ratios that are seen in young children. Because, you know, they're growing, you're declining, you kind of hit sort of a similar balance, because that just seems to be how it works. So it's important to sort of understand with all of these results that the results do and do not imply about sort of group differences in intelligence. So the fact that genes which impact IQ vary substantially from person to person, it kind of makes it plausible that genes play some role in slightly more third-rail topics, or by this point in time, fourth or fifth rail topics,
exactly.
Things like racial IQ differences. Ooh, yes. Just gonna don my hat here.
We're poking the bear.
Yes, we are, and not in a good way. So, something to realize here is that, however, the heritability of differences within two groups is not going to be the same as the heritability between them. So, for instance, if you've got two areas and you're looking at, say, genes for height, the difference might be entirely due to genes, but between the differences there, they may have been caused by the fact that, say, one area that those people are in have really favourable conditions and the other is really hostile conditions. So that can impact even sort of how the genetics have sort of said, this is kind of how it should be, because, well, genes interact with the environment like that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone, but I know we've got to say this because people are going to be using the das racist thing, because they will. So,
selection pressures, yo.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a thing.
Yeah.
Basically, it's also part of that environmental thing, which, you know, does have an effect before people do the quote miney thing and saying, yeah, you're saying the environment does nothing. What about selection pressures? You mean the thing we just said?
Yeah, that's why I qualified earlier. I'm like, you know, that's not what we're saying here. Right?
Yep.
No. Yep. So just putting that out there.
Doesn't matter. People will still quote mine to suit what they want, because that's how they work. So all of this stuff that I've mentioned here is something called the Wilson effect. So this is sort of the thing, that is the name for the effect, where it becomes more correlated as you age. So there's been quite a lot of literature done on this, and some of it can be kind of misleading because they don't separate the studies by age. So when you do specifically segregate by age, there is a clear pattern that emerges, and that is the heritability of IQ does raise with age, and kind of goes up to sort of the 70 or maybe even 80 or more in late adulthood. So the influence of the shared environment falls to basically 0 by the time you're a young adult, In fact, in adulthood, the IQs of people who are biologically unrelated, but who were raised in the same environment, aren't significantly more similar than IQs of any pair of randos that you pick out the general population. So, in other words, differences in the homes people grew up in explains basically nothing about IQ variance in the adult population. It's pretty simple.
I would make one exception, only in terms of things like lead poisoning and things like that.
Yes.
Which has a lifelong effect.
Yes. So some very sort of quite extreme things like that, then yes, that will be...
I'm just putting that out there, that there are extreme things that could influence. It's not like you're pretending there aren't. So.
No. Well, again, this is something to note here. This is generalities. There will always be, you know, one or two really weird, extreme, extenuating circumstances. So, this fact is what behavioral geneticists have labeled the Wilson effect, and it's been shown in studies using a wide variety of methods over several decades, utilizing data from thousands of twin and study siblings. And that was from Bouchard 2013. Yep. So
yeah.
That's a thing. So... I'm trying to see where I've put the next thing on. Yeah, so the next part is going to be kind of segueing us into the genetic component, but I think that... Let me just quickly skim it. Okay, yeah, I know where the break is now, so I'll make that a little bit bigger. So, genetics is a larger factor in IQ and general intelligence than environment or any other factor. Genetics is the single largest influence. So,
I think that's been pretty well demonstrated.
Yep.
That's my opinion.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
There will be people who continue to try to disagree. They are free to try and debunk the dozen or so studies. Well, actually, one of them is a meta-analysis using around 200 studies. So if you want to tell me that I'm wrong, feel free to go through and disprove a couple of hundred studies. Or, you know, you can just read 20 pages out of a single textbook and then reach deeply into what I can only assume is your colon for the rest of the answer. Yes, that's what I assume must have happened. So, since more recent findings, including that done by the American Psychology Institute, which found that it was about 0.7 or 75% heritable, we're basically at the point where it is now known that IQ is largely heritable. And I would just say to this, frankly, anyone who disagrees or is still trying to peddle some "it's more environment than anything," they're either ignorant of the extent of the research done on IQ, or they're just lying to you because the idea of this makes them super uncomfortable and they desperately want something else to explain it.
You also have to look at the differentiation patterns. Environment, as far as I've seen and checked into, environment can have a stronger role at what we would consider the average or even lower end. But when you get up to the higher end, environment has even less effect. It's even more strongly heritably demonstrated. So, yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, you can raise them on the lower end.
Yeah.
But it's not so easy to change at the upper end.
Yeah. So basically, if you want to environmentally influence your kids, you've pretty much got to do it basically before the age of, well, basically before
6.
they hit puberty.
Yeah.
Really.
I'd even say 6, given my research. So, because so much happens in those first 6 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say definitely before adolescence. Yeah.
Yeah, because up to adolescence, the heritability was still around 0.5, so you're kind of half and half by then. But yeah, before 6, it's like 0.4% heritable. That's when you've got the most window. But I'm just saying you shouldn't discount up to puberty. But you know, the biggest difference is like basically 5 or 6 and younger. So that's when, you know, if you want to be, you know, socially inducing, trying to raise their IQ, that's the time that you really need to strike, which is very unfortunate because it's usually the time when your parents are the most knackered and can't be bothered, because that's sort of the time where kids are like the most irrational when it comes to everything.
There's a big community health push here in Canada right now, Success by 6. And it's based on a lot of this stuff, that now's the time that you have to expose them to different languages and expose them to different foods, and nutrition is super, super important. Get them exercising and all that stuff. So it's even reflected in less academic ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have to wonder whether they are informed by this. I'd assume somewhere, at some point,
oh, yes.
this was pointed out. So again, it's nice because it's a cultural source that kind of backs up what the science has been saying. So that's great. Just one more pin on the board, or nail in the coffin if you'd prefer.
Well, healthcare and child development are pretty inextricably linked, right? So, yeah, because pediatrics is massive, and this is a big part of it. So yeah, anyway, genomes.
Yes, genomes and the genetic link to intelligence. So it should be noted that we are beginning to map intelligence and IQ to genetics. Benjamin et al. In 2013, found one gene variant that predicted intelligence in a discovery sample of 12,500-ish individuals and a replication sample of around 500. So that was one gene variant that predicted intelligence to a reasonable degree. Davies et al. 2015 used 3 samples of around 53,000 people, 6,000 people, and another one around 5 to 5,500, which were genotyped and had their general intelligence measured. 13 gene variants were found to predict cognitive ability. So that's not IQ strictly, but part of G, just general intelligence, overall cognitive ability. Wright-Vell et al. 2014 used 3 samples, one of 107,000 individuals, and measured educational attainment specifically. Another used 24,000 people and measured general intelligence. A third sample contained 8,500 old individuals whom were being measured regarding dementia and memory. And they found 3 gene variants associated with educational attainment, which was also found to be associated with intelligence. So not only do we have overwhelming evidence that IQ is largely hereditary, we're even starting to map the genes associated with varying types of intelligence, including IQ and G. Now, as I'm gonna have to do here, because I know I have to whenever we talk about genes, I'm not saying there is a gene for intelligence.
You did have to specify that. Yeah.
I know I do. It's so sad, but this is what you gotta do. It's not saying there is a gene for intelligence or anything like that. No. The genes for intelligence are going to be pleiotropic, which basically means that it's got more than one gene in order to manifest. It really shouldn't be very surprising, but whenever you talk about it, people always want to do, oh, the one gene for this thing. Why don't you go and try and breed some of them Untermensch? Doesn't quite work like that.
It gets even better when you start talking about methylation, but that's another stream.
Yes,
so yeah,
that's a whole other thingamadoo, which we're not going to do here.
Yeah,
I've got all of the technical terms now. So now we're gonna go on to personality, which is we're going to be using the big 5 traits here, because they are, well, if IQ is the first most understood and best mapped thing in psychology, the big 5 is probably second.
Agreed.
These are 2 things which are really, really well understood. So if you don't like IQ, you can throw literally everything else out of the window. If you don't like the big 5 and IQ, you have no right to ever use any sort of psychological or sociological study ever again, because pretty much everything from that uses the same methodology that IQ and the big 5 did. Just putting that out there, because kind of important. So, what
are the big 5?
Yes,
for the people who don't know.
Yes, we're gonna do that now. So the big 5 personality is divided into 5 categories with their appropriate opposites, and it's using the ocean system. So that's openness, which is abstraction, dealing with ideas and representation and how open you are to dealing with them. Conscientiousness, which is order, duty, obligation, implementation, that sort of thing. Extroversion, which is social success and general sociability. Agreeableness, cooperation, basically cooperation versus competitive and things like that, and neuroticism, which is dealing with sort of levels of caution, security, and feeling safe, and all of that sort of good stuff. So I'm going to draw on the means from 4 twin studies, which were from Yang et al., done in Canada in 1996, Waller, done in the USA in 1998, Lowerlin et al., done in the USA in 1998, and Reinman et al., which was done in Germany in 1997. So those are four twin studies, and the average between all of them for heritability, openness was 0.57, conscientiousness 0.49, extroversion 0.54, agreeableness 0.42, and neuroticism 0.48. So kind of half and half, sort of genetic and environmental. I hope that lines up with what you found.
It does, yeah. Yeah. So I mean,
what
you
numbers
went
did
into
you
it.
get?
I didn't delve down deep into the actual methodology. I looked at the consensus of the heritability of it. So that's a fancy way of saying I put all my eggs in the basket of actually researching IQ tests, and the big 5 was a peripheral for me. So that's a fancy way of saying I was a bit lazy on that end. However, I got things to express it in percent lower than 40 in some cases.
Really?
With some getting stronger with age, which, as you've already pointed out. So some personality traits will actually become more evident of heritability as people age, but from a base standpoint, it's much less than IQ.
Yeah, which again, these numbers which I've got here pretty much line up with that. It's 0.2 to 0.3 difference between the two. So I mean that's fine. It lines up pretty well. And again, 2 independent people looking at different data sets. So good stuff.
Yep.
So even looking at personality, it's half genetically heritable. And it's really important to note here, personality is not intelligence. They
ding,
are
ding.
Completely different and separate things. And
different animal. This is one of the things I keep trying to say. I'm like, it's a different animal. It's different metrics. It's different. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Keep them separated.
Yep. And we know this because of how you test for personality and how you test for IQ. So again, I've got a little write up here. Feel free to sort of jump in on this one because I know this is a bit more your wheelhouse here. So if you want to just stop me, just say, shut up, I want to say something. That's completely fine.
Okay.
So for this part, I am going to be referencing Professor Jordan B. Peterson, someone who a lot of people who try to talk about intelligence and personality and conflate the two, you know, a lot of them really like this guy, so if you want to try and dismiss what I'm saying because it's me, go ahead and dismiss that because it's him. Dare ya. Not gonna do it, I don't think.
And for the record, Professor Peterson hasn't only referenced this like in passing, he's done entire lectures on it.
Yes.
So hours and hours.
Yep, and I really recommend people go and watch this before opening their mouths and saying that IQ doesn't really measure intelligence. Professor Jordan B. Peterson has a YouTube channel and he has video lectures, and they are entitled, the ones which I'm going to be drawing on here are called Biology and Traits, and there's about 20 of them. They're all like a couple of hour-long university lectures. So, you know, feel free to go and slog through that and then tell him why he's wrong about literally everything. Not going to go down very well. So, as we've established, personality is divided into 5 categories with their appropriate opposites, and that's the openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So, what's really important here is how do we conceptualize intelligence? And this is part that confuses people and leads them to saying stupid things like, oh, having street smarts means being smart in a way that IQ just can't measure, and other such nonsense related to emotional intelligence, which basically doesn't exist. So IQ has been tested and measured since the 1920s. It is the most understood and mapped concept in psychology. If you think IQ don't reals, and means absolutely nothing, then you have no right to ever use any manner of psychology research in anything you say or do, because most of psychological methods used in testing is based on the means used in IQ testing. So those early psychologists instantiated the method that all psychologists use to test their hypotheses. IQ has been defined in a more stringent way than any other construct in psychology. Really important there to note. So people who basically don't like IQ and IQ testing have over the years attempted to create other intelligences. So things like practical intelligence versus analytical intelligence, which is the street smarts versus book smarts kind of thing. They tried to create social intelligence, emotional intelligence, moral intelligence, linguistic intelligence, musical intelligence, logical intelligence, spatial intelligence, body kinesthetic intelligence, and intra- and interpersonal intelligence.
Many of those are already tested for in the subcategories of IQ tests, FYI.
Yes.
Just for people listening.
Yep.
Like,
well, that's what I'm going to go on and explain.
Yay! Go! Okay.
Again, two people independently come up with the same things. This is good signs, people. So, IQ testing eats much of, and in some cases all, of the variability that these other so-called intelligences are trying to measure. In fact, even the creator of the analytical versus practical paradigm has basically now given up on the idea, and has now in some ways basically spent the last few years trying to stop people from using it, because his previous work is so basically irrelevant compared to traditional IQ tests. So it's pretty funny when that happens, when someone comes up with an idea and are like, oh, this is a potential idea, and then a few years later they're like, yeah, this idea has no water whatsoever. And then idiots keep using it, and the person who invented it is like, no, stop doing it!
I made a mistake.
Yeah,
I
it's
was
like,
high.
I got it wrong.
It was Morocco. Yeah.
But, you know, that's a good thing, because, again, science, self-corrective.
Yep.
Work is always being done. Sometimes you just gotta let go of your ideas, because they're untenable. It's actually the sign of a good scientist and a good researcher that they're willing to do that.
You mean be wrong?
Yeah, and admit it.
Yeah.
So, you know, very, very important thing for people to be able to do. So, when trying to measure personality, which we measure using the Big Five, versus IQ as a predictor of long-term performance, the closest trait is conscientiousness, whose upper predictive correlation for long-term success is about 0.4. IQ's is about 0.5 to 0.6. So the high end of conscientiousness, which is 0.4, or 16% of the variance, the low end for IQ, which is 0.5, or 25% of the variance. So the variance of IQ is 1.5 times more powerful at predicting long-term success than the best personality indicator. So just a thing to keep in mind there.
I'm interjecting for 1 minute. Use the P word, predictor.
Yes.
A lot of people get hung up on predictor, right? Because predictor is a different word from guaranteed outcome. Predicting is the basis of psychology. It's making observations, finding patterns, correlating data, and making predictions based on everything you see. It is not a guaranteed thing. And I think a lot of people go, oh, well, this person has a high IQ and they haven't made anything of their life. It's a predictor. That's all it is. So again, don't boom a man off what predict means. It is just pattern recognition.
Yes. Just
and
because
probability.
You're predicted to have a high success, that doesn't mean you're going to.
Exactly.
You can quite easily become a drug-addled idiot who never achieves anything, bombs out society, and dies at the age of 30 with a needle in their arm. You could have an IQ of 140 and still do that.
Yep. And this was drilled into my head when I was in forensics, because all forensics essentially measures is probabilities. You look at the data, you take measurements, and you estimate probabilities. Even in DNA testing, you cannot testify in court it is 100% match. That's only on Maury. All right. You can say cannot be excluded or is excluded, or you can say a probability. But even then, you have to allow for that margin of error. in honesty. So it's a measure of probability. That's all I'm saying.
Yep, this is why a doctor will always tell you 99% certain this will happen.
Yep.
That's medical speak for 100%, but they have to have that 1% because there is a possibility that it could go completely wrong.
Yes. So I just wanted to stop you because you're starting to talk about predictors, and this is something I have seen get twisted with prediction. Well, prediction clearly means they're saying it's 100%. No, it is a prediction. That's all.
Yep.
Okay. Please continue.
Yep. Yep. It's just this could happen. This is like the upper possibility of it. People don't live up to their potential all the time.
It's just a measure of probability. That's it. Okay.
Yep. So, how do we work out what IQ measures compared to what all of these other so-called forms of intelligence measure? And it's to do with the degree of variance. So, you test multiple things, and then you sort of ask, well, how far does their correlation have to be before you consider them to be the same thing, or you consider them to be different things? So that's sort of one very important thing to consider. So, you kind of have to set that bar yourself. Sort of for what you would consider a necessary correlation before you say that two things you're testing are the same, or two things you're testing are different. Now, general guidelines would be, say, 0.8 is high correlation, at which point, if you're measuring two different traits on the same thing, they're probably the same thing, maybe, or they've got something, a third thing in common that draws them both together. If it's low, like 0.1, 0.2, then you can probably say, yeah, that's suitably different. So, general guidelines doesn't have to be adhered to, it's just how it goes. So if they're both highly correlated, then if you're high in one, you'll probably be high in the other thing, so you might as well actually just be measuring one thing if they're really highly correlated. So in this instance, you've got to sort of work it out, like what is the utility of measuring both things? And that's something that we work out statistically. So you pick the target of something that you want to work out. So in this instance, again, we'll use possibility of success at university. And then you ask, because easiest way of doing it, so then you ask can we predict your success better by using one variable, or two variables, or three or four, and so on and so forth. So you'd enter them into a regression equation, which basically just tells you how well you can predict that target if other variables are known. So it'll tell you if you want to predict C, and you know A or B, or A and B, then you can weight A and B. That's all it is, pretty simple. So you can then tell if two variables are different enough if you can use both of them to predict a third thing while using them simultaneously. Really easy, like really simple concept. So, when it comes to these different kinds of intelligence, the emotional, musical, spatial, street smarts, and all of that sort of stuff. So if we want to measure them, you test them all individually to see if there's any sort of correlation between them. So if there's a correlation of 1 or 0.9 or 0.8, then you have one thing, because they're both measuring the same thing. They both correlate really highly to that outcome, so you might as well just say it's one thing. And you then have to factor analyze them to see if there's anything common across all of them. In this instance, intelligence. So you then take them all and put them into a regression analysis to predict your target, and again we'll say university success. But then you go even further, you use multiple points. So you'd say success in junior high, success in high school, success in university performance, success in jobs, and all of that good stuff. And then you take all the things that are the same trait-wise, and you measure success, and that's pretty much how IQ comes about. And IQ is, in that instance, then, what is common across all of those other kinds of intelligence, or supposed kinds of intelligence that exist. So, yeah, that's pretty simple. So, yeah, I've got another sort of couple of paragraphs, and then we'll open things up a bit more. And then you'll say, sure. Well, in another instance there, well, what is a test? What is an IQ test? How do we define the test?
Oh, I can do it.
Can you?
Well, I can do it to my satisfaction, and you'll no doubt have things to add. So you go first.
Yeah, I've basically only got sort of 3 or 4 sentences on this, so I'll do that. Feel free to disagree if you wish. So, psychometricians have got around this by saying that not everything we measure is defined as intelligence. So, extroversion, which would be social intelligence, well, IQ is a better measure of it, so we're going to call extroversion personality. So when you try to use extroversion to predict, say, academic success, it does a worse job than IQ. So we're just going to say, okay, nope, IQ, intelligence is this thing, and this other thing over here, it becomes a trait known as personality. So cooperation is another one, which has been attempted to be, again, redefined as emotional intelligence. And cooperation isn't a measure of intelligence, because cooperative people aren't necessarily smarter than competitive people. So are you less intelligent because you're competitive? No. So again, that becomes agreeableness, not part of intelligence. And then the question is there anything left of all of these other kinds of intelligence that we've talked about? You know, the emotional, the spatial, the kinesthetic, the intrapersonal, the musical, the linguistic. Is there anything left of those things once you control for IQ and the big 5 personality traits? The answer is no. There is actually nothing left at all. IQ and the big 5 personality traits just demolishes them completely. Whenever you try and put those things through any model, it always boils back down to IQ or personality. Every time. I would agree. There's nothing left of any other kind of variable. So, IQ and big 5 personality, 2 best things that we have so far.
And just so you're not taken out of context, obviously athletic ability might be its own thing.
Yes. Yeah. So something like that may be separate, although
it still has kinesthetic and spatial and things like that. So it still even with music
falls into it.
Yeah, and music overlaps with mathematics, and so
it still falls into IQ and personality, basically, as well.
I just wanted to put the one exception that you can have all of these things, but you may never be a basketball player. There are some limitations.
Yeah, because, well, that just goes down purely to biology.
But even Larry Bird, you know, who would look at Larry Bird and think you're going to be a great basketball player?
I have no idea who that is at all.
Okay, moving on. Moving on. Okay.
If there was a joke there, I will happily admit that it went very squarely over my head by several miles. It was basically orbiting.
I think we just need to watch sports together sometime.
I hate watching sports. It's the most boring thing imaginable.
Even football?
Yeah, I hate it.
Wow.
I can't stand watching it. I would rather be doing it.
Oh, see, I agree with you there. But we're getting off onto a tangent. Okay, so you've touched on something that was a big part of what I try to explain to people. That IQ tests, there's different subcategories of them. You know, when you take a test, and it's not just figuring out puzzles. It's 3-dimensionality and spatial things and verbal ability and vocabulary. When I was taking them, vocabulary was done in a really interesting way because we're getting into the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence. So it's not like there was a list of big words that you would get a little check mark next to if you used. It was how you could express yourself. Could you reach into the recesses of your brain and describe things in an evocative way? Could you use language to its fullest potential? So I think some of the cultural arguments against IQ tests are, well, how would they ever have heard that word? But the question with IQ tests, the ones that I took anyway, were, but how are you using the words you do know? So and that's a misconception I find when I try and discuss IQ tests with people, and I honestly think that maybe they've taken like a 4-minute BuzzFeed thing and they think, well, that's an IQ test.
Yeah,
well,
it's not in no way at all.
No, it really, really isn't. Or they go to Mensa and, well, I took a Mensa IQ test. I'm like, okay, was it a controlled situation? Those answers have been leaked on the internet ahead of time. Did you look at them first? Did you study? Because getting into the history of IQ tests, here we go. Okay. And this is where I've got my notes.
Yay!
Yay!
Strap in, everybody. It's Bunny's turn to go to town.
Here we go. So, IQ tests have been around for about 100 years. And roughly, okay? And they were developed specifically to not measure the things taught in school. And again, this gets into fluid versus crystalline intelligence. Fluid intelligence is what IQ tests were developed to measure originally. And I'm talking Stanford Binet, way back when. So, and even the original developers stressed this has limitations. It will be influenced by external factors, but there is something to measure here. And we are going to do our best to try and measure that kind of smart that is not based on what kids are learning in school, because we want to measure what comes close to objective intelligence, right? And when you're talking about cognitive tests, IQ tests specifically, and not all cognitive tests express it in terms of IQ. So I'll get into that a little bit too. But you've got the Wechsler scales, there's several of them, and they were built on the original tests, and they had the subcategories that we referenced earlier. You've got the Kaufman assessment battery that begins at 3, and that is for nonverbal kids. So what criticisms of the IQ testing methodologies, an awful lot of time and effort and research has gone into fixing methodological problems. It's only been around for 100 years only, but as you said earlier, and as Professor Peterson says, this is extremely well researched, and this is what so many other things in psychology are based on. So it's not like the criticisms coming up now, it's not like nobody ever thought of them. There's no nice way to say that. I'm like, yeah, I think they thought of that in the 30s. So I think they made efforts to fix it if you look at the methodological changes.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. People on the internet like, well, I've created this thing that disproves it. It's someone fielded that idea about 70 years ago and it was dealt with.
Yeah, and yeah, but there's no nice way to point that out. But, and for people listening, fluid intelligence, I'm just reiterating this, that's the raw cognitive ability that most IQ tests are designed to measure. Crystallized intelligence is learning ability, which is sometimes it overlaps, but it's its own separate thing too in its own way. Anyway, this probably makes no sense unless you look into it. But when we talk about, and there's the Reynolds intellectual assessment scales, and they're very focused on verbal and nonverbal. So when you talk about, well, IQ only measures this one thing, there are so many tests that try and measure all of these areas. And IQ tests and cognitive testing, more accurately, I would say it's cognitive testing because IQ is very specific. But the correct procedure is actually to do what's called a cross battery. I mean, you've heard that term, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Multiple tests looking at all of the things.
And then finding out what correlates.
Yep.
What are the statistical outliers and what do those mean? So you aren't, I mean, when I was tested, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but it was from age 4 to 11. I wasn't put in a room and given one test. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was years of my life with different tests, and I was never told what the right answer was. And I was, frankly, not really told what it meant. My parents were given the recommendations. So, I don't know. I sit there, I have a pencil, I answer the questions. But, yeah, so cross-battery testing.
Just a very important thing that I think really, really needs to be hammered home. IQ tests are not those stupid little things that you do for 5 or 10 minutes on a website. Even the Mensa website test.
Yep.
It's not going to be a substitute for a proper battery of tests, which you will have to do multiple times, multiple instances, because you need multiple instances of the same thing to establish sort of the baseline of that thing, because that's reliability. And
in a controlled situation.
In a controlled situation, yeah. And you need, again, to do multiple different things, looking at all of these different aspects of what IQ is. So the idea that, I really do think you're right, that a lot of people who are criticizing these IQ tests think that an IQ test is like this one-off thing that you do on a website or on a TV show or some such nonsense like that. It's no. Proper IQ tests will take, days. It's like you can do a different test every day for a month, and then you'll start getting something. like actually
and
usable.
people, and what I find funny is people need to wrap their heads around this. All the studies that you've cited had test subjects,
Yep.
right? And
Tens
I was one of those.
Thousands of
yeah,
them.
And I was one of those, right? Somewhere. I also lived in a teaching university town, right? So they were constantly, ooh, we're going to pick your brain. Oh, you're a guinea pig. Yay. So I'm sure somewhere I was a test subject of one of these studies. I'm sure.
Well, there was one of them in Canada. So
yeah.
Very possibly you might have actually been part of one of the cohorts for that.
Yeah, I don't know. But what I'm saying is the test subjects like me exist because where do you think they get their sample size? Yeah, it happens. So, okay. And getting back to IQ tests being introduced on a larger scale, a guy named Goddard is usually credited with bringing it to widespread use in America. And in terms of implementing it for immigrants and things like that, because that was a thing. No? And unfortunately, he also kind of went over into eugenics land. So I think that how easily, and we're going to get to this later, I'm sure, when we're poking the bear, but it is unfortunately easy for things like these kind of metrics to be seized as a, well, we need to gas the Jews, don't we? Or whatever. But should the fear of that outcome prevent the research from being done? Because it's not the research that is bad, and any research can be used in a negative way. So what I get the feeling from, in many cases, listening to huge critics of IQ and comment sections and things like that, well, I don't want to see this happen. Okay, I'm right there with you, right? However, it's not the research's fault. So focus on the research. If you have criticisms about the research, fine, but don't call for research to no longer be done because it could hurt people. The onus is on correcting the people who are going to use it for a negative purpose, yeah? But the research itself is fine. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's something Professor Peterson said too, that many of his colleagues in psychology were throwing the baby out with the bathwater because of potential social implications for what happens if we pursue this data. So, but yeah, so getting back to IQ, do you have anything to say about that, or you're very quiet?
No, I'm pretty on board with that. It just reminds me of that first conversation I had with Stardust all those months ago about the topic of delicious forbidden knowledge. It's like, no, there should be no sort of research or anything like that. As long as it's ethical, everything should be on the table. Because it's not the research which is going to cause the bad things. It's going to be the people looking at the research and then using the research to then justify or bolster any sort of bigoted or prejudiced views that they might then have. It's not the research causing it, it's that point of view usually previously exists, and then they use something else to justify it.
And part of the reason why I think we have to be so, we have to be on top of IQ, we have to be on top of the data and the methodology, is because IQ does factor into things like our education system and even our legal system. This is an angle often left out of the IQ debate, but everyone is aware, I hope, that IQ is a factor in sentencing. And it is still, not guilty by reason of mental defect, things like that. And your IQ, what level you test at, can be the difference between committing a capital crime or being sentenced with incarceration. So we can't shy, as long as we're going to continue to use these metrics, we can't shy away from them. We have to refine them even more. And we're going to get into that a bit with the Flynn effect, right?
Yep.
Because that is something that's happening right now. Okay, for those who don't know, Flynn effect. So in the 80s, my time, because I'm old, in the 80s, IQ was a pretty big thing. It was used in the military quite extensively. It was the next hot topic. It was really at what I consider to be the height of its active research. And some people were actually proponents of it in order to equalize fluid versus crystallized intelligence. Perhaps a disadvantaged student who did not have the benefit of a good school could still show the cognitive ability that they were university material, because this was back when to go to university you had to actually be smart. You don't anymore, FYI. So there you go. But you did used to. So, and that was considered a good thing because it would be elevating really bright kids who just didn't get the book learning that they should have gotten for whatever reason. But anyway,
yeah,
Flynn
it's
observed,
actually around that time that we just, again, highlight something because cultural sources. Pretty much a similar time in the UK. We used to, in the UK, back in the day, have the education system. You'd go sort of from when you entered about 4 up to 13, then 13 through to 16, 16 to 18, then university beyond that. And the 16 to 18 education is, well, it's now called A-levels. The thing is, back in the 80s, because that was a very academically focused kind of course, because of research like this, it was obviously found that there are some kids who don't respond necessarily totally to that. So there was a push to get these other things in called BTECs, which are basically sort of more tactile learning things. They're more on-the-job sort of learning that then gives you a piece of paper at the end that says, yes, you've demonstrated, aptitude and ability within this thing, but it's just not, it's not a formal education thing, but it's still, an important thing for you to have. So again, this research has been used to, socially really improve things for a lot of people, because there's some people, they suck at tests. There are people who just suck at tests and suck at testing and all of that sort of stuff. So then the ability to give them something more practical, it's, hey, you can actually demonstrate that you're not a complete window licker. Because this research has allowed us to actually sort of measure and quantify it in some kind of capacity.
We had split streams here too. We had basic, general, and advanced. And it hurt people's feelings. So now everybody is streamed the same. So everything gets dumbed down, right?
Yay!
Because, yay! Yay! And there are some kids who did not want to be in the advanced class. They did not want that extra workload. They would voluntarily take general or basic because, I'm never going to be doing anything with university chem. I don't need to be learning university chem in high school. And it seemed to work pretty well. People kind of streamed into their own intellectual areas, but people, I think it was mostly parents who complained, honestly. But now we got rid of that, so now everything is, general. But yeah, yay. But getting back to sort of the IQ Flynn effect stuff, essentially what Flynn noticed, and in IQ there are kind of 2 names that sound the same. So there's Flynn, and he's the guy that did the modernity effect, and there's Lynn, and he's the one that did the race stuff, and we'll get to him later. But Flynn and Lynn. All right. So the Flynn effect essentially noticed that IQ scores were becoming higher, and he attributed it to environmental factors such as exposure to modernity. And some of his research, because I had to peek into it, was some of it is pretty sound, actually. It's things like your 3-dimensional thinking will become improved even with things like video games.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, yeah, that data backs that up. You're correct. Yeah, okay, I can see that. Now, in the renorming pattern, and because other thing a lot of people don't know, and people don't know that IQ tests are renormed every 15 to 20 years, which means they go, okay, well, this has changed, this has changed, this has changed. We got to make new tests. We got to tweak the old tests. So renorming, 15 to 20 years. And the problem with the Flynn effect, and this is one of the problems with IQ testing, is after renorming, there's a shift. Scores become lower because there's no exposure to that kind of testing. And then at the end of the renorming cycle, scores are higher. And this is what's been noted in the Flynn effect. However, the difference, and when people talk about the Flynn effect, there's a lot of, well, but it's a huge difference. It's not. I think I was reading the average was 6 points. So there is a difference, but it's not statistically huge. So
it's not like it goes to a whole standard deviation or something like that.
No, not that I read. I mean, there may be more data out there. This is something that I could research the rest of my life if I chose to. Anybody could. You could research this stuff every single day, right? But from what I've seen so far, no, it was like 6 points is what I was reading. So, and though, like I mentioned earlier, with the Flynn effect, the biggest changes come at the lower end of the spectrum. So, when people are criticizing IQ that I'm hearing online anyway, the Flynn effect, it's all environmental, or it's mostly environmental. And if they just had better nutrition and better schooling and better parenting and all of this stuff, it would totally revolutionize IQ and we would all be 150s, wouldn't we? And no, you can shift at the younger ages. We've already talked about this. You can improve your child's chance of success. We're talking about probabilities again. Of course you can. But that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about IQ. IQ is a simple slice of raw cognitive intelligence. It is extremely well defined. So, yeah. Go ahead.
No,
jump in.
No, I had nothing. I
okay.
had nothing apart from, I'm just again going to repeat what I said earlier. It is the most stringently defined concept in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing better defined than IQ.
And I love the IQ doesn't measure anything, and there are other kinds of intelligence. Okay,
yeah.
But when we're talking about cognition is not a unitary trait. A single situation will use multiple different cognitive areas, and IQ tests account for those different areas.
Yep.
And it's so you're talking in circles. It's already been accounted for if you look into the subcategories and how they're conducted. So
yeah, and that's what we covered earlier, talking about the Big Five and how it separated itself out from IQ. This is why I'm so sick when people try and use these other forms of intelligence and personality quirks as if to try and say, oh, that explains why IQ is terrible. No, that was dealt with like 20, 30 years ago. Okay, it's not an argument anymore.
And if you're trying to confirm, like when you're not being investigative, when you're simply trying to confirm your point of view, you can find data on cognitive testing supporting almost every take.
Yes.
Like, take a day and look into learning disabilities and IQ, because you'll get tons of stuff on how IQ is helpful to people with learning disabilities, because it can identify areas of weakness that then, okay, well, how do we fix that? I'll give you an example. I scored, I'm probably stupid now, I drank a lot of beer. Anyway, but I scored really high on theoretical math, but because I have a numerical learning disability, my practical math was like, so, and that pointed it out. It's like, how does she score this on theoretical math and she can't do algebra? How does that work? So, but you'll also see a lot of arguments on the other side saying that IQ tests or cognitive testing is completely irrelevant to learning disabilities and will dishearten children, and they'll think they're stupid because they score low. And so you can find evidence with IQ, evidence for any position you hold in this sphere. There's so much out there. It's because it's so well researched. But the trick is, if you're going to be intellectually honest, you can't only look at the stuff that supports your point of view. You also have to read the shit that goes against what you believe. So, because that's
for all the people trying to say like, oh, IQ doesn't really measure anything, and my personality, it's no. You have literally taken the smallest slice of the things that agree with you and ignored the masses of stuff which tells you why you're wrong.
Well, to me, there's this underlying, well, cognitive ability can't be tested. Okay, how do we test cognitive ability in other animals?
Yes.
Can we do that? Okay, if we can do that, obviously humans are more complex animals. But if you agree cognitive ability can be tested in other animals, then you have to leave the door open that it is possible to test in us.
Yeah.
And then the next question following that is cognitive ability subject to evolutionary biology? I think we've already pretty well established it is. Well, you did. You had all the weapons of mass data. So
well, this is why we have two halves of the stream. It's very incidental that we seem to have concentrated on different areas, but not really surprising, because it was different areas of interest.
Well, we came at it from two completely different angles, but so much of what we have uncovered is overlapping, which I think is kind of cool. You know, I had no idea what was happening.
Quality of the data.
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind, and I don't hear this brought up enough either, IQ tests are recent in human evolution, right? It's only 100 years. I mean, that's nothing. That's nothing. That's a fart. But what they are trying to test for is not a new human trait. You can go back to friggin' Cicero talking about humans of different intelligences and how do we measure that. So cognition as an idea, not a new idea.
No, not at all. I mean, there's even been some really interesting, there's even, like, if you go back to Egyptology and whatnot, they're talking about, like, how different areas of the brain and the body and, like, the heart are associated with different things and ways of thinking and emotions and whatnot. So, I mean, obviously by today's standards, it's all complete made-up bullshit pseudoscience, but even back then, they were sort of trying to come up with stories and means of explaining it.
So, be it resolved that we have demonstrated a preponderance of data that IQ is largely heritable, can be influenced by environment, but in very specific ways. We've established that genetic differentiation is influenced by the environment there generally, right? Selection pressures and stuff like that.
Yep.
We've talked about the personality traits as opposed to what would essentially is the Wechsler version of IQ, cognitive ability. And I think there's only one frontier left to tackle.
Would you like to introduce it, or shall I?
Well,
who wants to don their SS uniform first?
I was just gonna say, I don't know how to do an Ava Braun impression. I don't even know what she's. I don't know. I can't even do German. I can't do it. My accents are horrible. So we'll just pretend. Okay.
Yeah, pretend. I can only, I think, really do an incredibly gay German, because I've totally not spent hours watching Hans Gretel. There were no way that did I spend far longer than I should have watching those videos. Moving on. Okay, so it's essentially, you all know where we're going with this. Race realism. Dun dun dun. Yes, it is the thing. Quite the thing.
It is. We're Nazis officially now, just for even saying it.
Yes, just for even engaging with the thing. Clearly, we wish to segregate everyone based on phenotype and ensure a future for the white children and things.
Yeah, exactly. My white children. Oh, I'm sorry. It's so funny. No, I know it's going to happen.
This stream just turned into white supremacy.
It did. I've been getting increasingly more Nazi-ish now that I'm Grizzly Adams off grid, right? I can say what I actually want, but I want to talk about these things.
Bunny.
It's all about my ginger privilege, my ginger babies. There we go. Yay! No, somewhere somebody is saying, Teal and Bunny, alt-right dog whistling. What?
Yeah, it's gonna be a thing, and
it's gonna happen. We're alt-right dog whistling, obviously. Yes, okay,
it's dog whistling. I can already hear it over the hills. Can you hear it? Just.
It is. You do a good re.
Yes, I can do it much longer and much louder, but I flatly refuse because RIP headphone users.
I was just going to say that. I'm like, I'm so sorry, Jet, because I even had to take one off the ear there. So, but it was great. It was. Oh yeah. So let's talk about this, because we have to be able to talk about it and try and figure it out without being afraid of all these nasty names that we will no doubt be called, because data is data.
Yep.
Just look at the data. Let's see what's going on.
Yeah. Right? I want to point one thing out here, because it's gonna be it's the thing. It's actually the last two lines of my write-up here. So it's the only reason people try to push the idea that, there's all of these other kinds of intelligence than, IQ and G and all of those other nonsense ones, like, the emotional, the musical, the derp and all that stuff. And they want to sort of try and define IQ as being invalid, is because ultimately, they don't like the idea of individual differences, and definitely not any sort of demographic difference when it doesn't suit them. So you might find some people who are sort of trying to push this, they'll use demographic differences and the information around it to explain things like why men and women, like why there's more male than female CEOs and things like that. But when you begin applying the exact same process, the exact same scientific process to, you know, things like demographics and IQ, yeah, that's a nerve that's been hit, and we don't like that. We don't accept that method of working, even though we just used it, because racism, eugenics, evolution stops at the neck, and various other fallacious reasoning.
Oh, one thing I love when people will say, you know, look at this study, it proves that conservatives have lower IQs, and then next breath they'll say, but IQ is wrong if it says black people have lower IQs than white people. So I'm like, well, so you're kind of picking and choosing when IQ is useful to you? Is that what you're doing right now? Okie dokie. You know, because it's a thing or it isn't. And for people who are like, I don't mind if people are like, I think IQ is flawed, or it's not the only metric. We've already covered that. It isn't the only metric. It's just the best one for what it actually measures. Yes. Frankly, in my opinion.
It pretty much is. I mean, there's to date, there has been nothing that has projected things like success and general potential ability cap in life better than IQ. There may be a better way, potentially, in the future. There's no reason why there might not be, but for now, it's the best thing we've got.
Have you ever asked someone, you know, okay, you think IQ is bullshit. How would you measure cognitive ability in humans? Have you ever watched them try to puzzle it out, and they go, well, I do this, and oh no, that's flawed too. Yep. Well, I could do, oh, well, that really won't work either, because that only measures a certain point. And inevitably what they come up with is either, well, I wouldn't, because measuring intelligence just makes people feel bad, or they end up coming up with, well, I would have different categories, and I would have to test in a controlled environment, and I would have to ensure that they couldn't study for it ahead of time, because that's just learning. That's not really cognition the same way. And what they inevitably come up with is the battery of tests currently used.
Yes.
I'm like, congratulations.
Yeah, you've just literally validated IQ testing. Thank you. Well done.
There you go. So,
or if they really don't believe in IQ, I just say, okay, here's, you're going to have a baby. Okay. Do you want it to have an IQ of 60 or 120? Just pick.
It's things like that, right? And I mean, we're getting into eugenicsville ourselves right now, which is a very, very dirty word. It's a very dirty word, Teal. So
I know, right? I don't understand why. It's the quote, which I cannot remember who said it, but it's completely true. So eugenics is not only possible, it's trivial, because human beings practice it all the goddamn time. It's just, it's not being directed from like one sort of central authoritative body, therefore they don't think they're doing it, which is absurd. It's like, no, you practice eugenics like by yourself. It's like society does it by itself. It's like rich people and smart people tend to only really hang around rich people and smart people. They tend to have the most in common with them. So surprise, surprise, that's who they end up having kids with. Dumbass Cletus the dirt farmer probably ends up marrying dumbass Jane the dirt farmer as well. What a fucking surprise. That's a form of eugenics. It happens.
It's not nice to say, but and you also get the other side of people encouraging women. You know, we have to reduce the number of single mothers, so you need to choose better husbands. You need to choose smarter men, better men, more ethical men. That's mate selection. Yep. That's it, and there's nothing wrong with mate selection. There's nothing wrong with trying to choose someone who fits your criteria for what you want your baby to grow up around. Yeah. That's nothing wrong with that at all. Sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but it's
a form of eugenics.
It's micro eugenics.
Yes.
And if we look at cultures, which I'm sure we're going to get into now, when we start to look at cultures that do that kind of selective mating, and they select for intelligence, surprise, surprise, imagine my shock, in the bell curve and other works like it, they magically have higher IQs. How did that happen? They've selected for intelligence.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's almost like genes influence how smart people are.
Yeah, but we can't. Yeah, but we can't say that, right? Because that's bad. And there are cultures that do not select for intelligence, and shock of shocks, all the data suggests they have lower average IQs. Amazing! It's almost like it's been selected for over evolution of geographical populations. I don't know.
Well, I mean, Dems sounds like neo-Nazi words, Bunny.
I know.
I mean, how could you possibly suggest that what people select for in their mates are what their offspring have? I mean, how could you? It's insane.
But people really do get wrapped around the axle about this. And part of my brain understands it because we are in such a racially charged environment right now. However, this is one, unless we are trying to say, we are now going to base legislation, more legislation, because there's already legislation based on IQ. And again, this isn't brought up very often, but we're now going to introduce more legislation saying that people of this IQ have to live in the ghetto or things like that. Yeah, I'd have a fucking problem with that. I would. But that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about examining the data and seeing if it has legs and if it doesn't. And you can't do that if you're scared to even talk about it or look at it or research it. So you got to turn over the rocks.
Yes, you do.
So,
and that's what we're going to do.
Yes.
Right now.
Okay. Take us away.
Oh, do I have to? Okay. Okay, so it's the good old race and IQ thing, or to be actually completely accurate about it, genetic populations and IQ.
Yes.
Because we're not going to use the race thing, because race is generally the term used for more sort of phenotypical differences. Obviously, when you use it in medicine and you go to a hospital and you talk about race, that is then based on general genetic things more than just how people look. But
agreed. Race is one of the most impossible terms to define currently, as depending on what discipline you're looking through the lens of, it means something completely different, effectively.
Yeah.
From discipline to discipline.
Yeah.
So
that's why I'm not really a fan of that term. So that's why I much prefer the term genetic population, and it's why that's the term used, more through study and in academia. It will be either Klein or genetic population or something like that. Something a bit more specific than just you kind of look like this, therefore you are this. We can be far more specific than that.
Yes.
So we'll do that. So when you start talking,
so we have solved the problem. Just for the audience, for anyone still listening to us at this point, we have solved the race problem. We have agreed that it can be defined in many different ways. So we are using a specific term for it.
Yes.
Check.
Yes.
All right.
Will people actually listen and give a shit about that, or will they just go with what they thought was said anyway? I'm willing to bet that they'll just go with what they thought was said anyway. So, when you want to consider things like IQ and genetic population, you are inevitably sampling very, very wide samples of those particular populations, which you divide up by certain genetic traits. And very perhaps unsurprisingly, when you do so, because IQ is genetically heritable by majority, you end up with different genetic populations scoring differently. Now, what we have to do here is explain bell curves, which, rather hilariously, I have seen some of our oh-so-very rational people, when someone talks about bell curves, actually just say, "What's a bell curve? What does that even mean?" It's like, you should not be talking about this if you don't know what a bell curve is. Just please stop now. Close your mouth, the grown-ups are talking. Go and sit in the corner. It's awful. So
yeah, I could understand people not understanding like a regression analysis, because that's a little more, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But a bell curve, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Continue.
Yeah, really simple stuff. It's a curve shaped like a bell. It shows the distribution of things. That's all it is. So what happens is when you end up with all these different genetic populations taking things like IQ tests, you end up with a load of bell curves. And the bell curves do not overlap perfectly. They have their mean point at different areas. So the usual hierarchy of things is you end up with sort of black, basically non-white, BME populations, as we would call them in the UK, black and minority ethnic, as having their peak generally below 100. It varies by genetic population and by environment as well. As we've covered, environment is something that impacts it. So you look at some areas in Africa, the peak of the bell curve might be 60 or even 50 in some areas. So that's a thing to consider. But even when westernized, so you take, say, the black population of America, the peak will still be around sort of 80. But it's a bell curve. It goes way down to about 40 and way up to like 140, 150 sort of thing. So there are people at those extreme ends. So just because the mean is there, that doesn't mean that that's what everyone is like in that population.
And I think that sometimes that's how it's presented by people attempting to push an agenda or push a particular perspective, and it's very important to not do that. So thank you for pointing out the bell curve.
Yes. So again, the other one, when you generally look at white populations, their bell curves, again, varies by region. Generally, the median sits somewhere between 90 and 100. Some go a little bit higher to about 105, but generally it's around that region for the peak. And again, there are people who go all the way down to the 30s and 40s, and there's people who go all the way up to the 140s and 150s, but it just means that most people cluster around the sort of 90 to 100 mark. And the sort of Far East Asian, the Oriental types, tend to have their median more towards the 110, 115 area. Again, that's just where most cluster. Of course, again, you have people all the way down at the 40s and all the way up at the 140s, 150s. That's it. That is all it means. It just means that most people cluster statistically around that mean, really unsurprisingly, because that's how means work. But you have people who vastly exceed and vastly under that average. So that's kind of how that works. So some people sort of like to try and misunderstand this, like when you say, if say you had a cutoff point and you said, okay, we only want people for our super secret genius club, we only want people with a 140 IQ or more, and that was the cutoff point. Anyone below that can't join your super secret club. Everyone above that can join your super secret club. Okay. Perhaps it should serve as no surprise to anyone that because of where the medians are and how the curve is formed up to its highest point and down to its lowest point, if you do that, you end up with more East Asian people and more white people than you do black people. In fact, it ends up kind of proportionally more East Asians than second in proportion is white, and third in proportion tends to be black and minority ethnic. I mean, that shouldn't really be a surprise.
Ashkenazi Jewish is up there too, I think.
Yes, Ashkenazi Jew is definitely up towards that end.
Yeah.
And again, we have to actually here consider differences in the different kinds of intelligence that IQ tests deal with, because Jewish people tend to actually really excel, or the Ashkenazi Jews who have the highest thing, they tend to test higher in things like verbal reasoning, verbal intelligence, and things like that. So, sort of anything sort of dealing with words and the like. So, just a very interesting quirk of that population. Again, they, even with a high IQ, they tend to show a cluster more towards excelling in that area of the battery of tests as opposed to other areas. Just an interesting little quirk there. And again, it kind of highlights the differences between different genetic populations. And what's really interesting is when you compare Ashkenazi Jews to Middle Eastern Jews. Middle Eastern Jews are actually closer to, unsurprisingly, the Arabian average, which is sort of about 80 to 90. In some cases, it goes down to 70. So, it depends by the area. But again, that shouldn't really be a surprise.
No,
because Middle Eastern
nothing,
Jews.
but nothing that we're saying so far, I think, should be a big surprise.
It shouldn't. But there are going to be people who try and act like it's like the most offensive things ever. It's no, it really isn't, or it shouldnn't be anyway.
Shouldn't be.
But there will be people who sort of trying to say, oh, so you want like ethno-nationalism and things like that. You're trying to say that? It's no. I don't really want to have a population based around purely the means. You know, I would much rather say, okay, why don't we just have the cutoff point of, say, 110 IQ, or 115, which would make it one standard deviation above the mean. You know, why not just operate on that? Because I will have more in common with 115 IQ and above than I will with than I will with, say, an 80 IQ person, just because they look kind of like me.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this correlates with what I've read as well. And have we been firebombed yet? Has anyone tried to dox us or anything? Are we still good? Are we still good?
I think so. I think the reeing sound is getting a little bit louder, but it's fine. We can ignore it.
And again, just looking at the data does not mean the suggestion, well, let's put them all in camps. Like, that's not. But look at it, right? Look at data is data. It depends on how you use them, and just looking at something does not innately, it's not like Scientology where if you read the certain text you get pneumonia and die. You know, it's just information. I would like to see a bit more depth put into it. I don't think it will be permitted. Like, I don't think anybody will get a research grant to do this. I would really like to even drill deeper and go finer. So within these clients, what about subpopulations? I would love to see that. I'll give you an example.
It's been done.
Has it been done in depth? And I just haven't read it?
Reasonably in depth. There is a source which I found from, it's actually come off of one of Coltane's videos where he looked at, actually quite specifically, this sort of topic. And it was done in China. And the higher IQs in China, because, you know, again, it's kind of like, oh, it's all well and good to say, like, oh, the Chinese average of, like, 110, 115-ish. But when you break it down by region, the coastal areas, which is where a lot of the larger cities are, the average is higher there. That tends to be the sort of, you know, 120s-ish. But when you go out to sort of more of the landlocked areas, it goes down to, you know, about 100. So, again, it's kind of like different areas absolutely do give you different averages, which again kind of says what we were talking about previously, that people practice self-segregation.
Have you become a robot?
No.
I'm hearing like robot staticky noises. It might just be me. Okay. Okay, that's
I can't hear them, and I can hear everything going through my mic in my headphones. So
okay, it might just be on mine then. Okay. I'll have to look into that. I'm glad it's been done, because that's exactly the kind of thing that I was going for. Because there are cultures that do not select for intelligence, and you can call it race, or you can call it a geographical population, or you can call it a self-segregated population. And I would love to see it investigated more. So I obviously have more watching to do. But with the race realism stuff, just to get back on track with poking the bear, poor bear. And that's not a bearing joke. It's just the bear in general. So we talked about selection pressures. And for me, when I was looking at race realism, because I started kind of becoming aware of it about a year ago, sort of when it started to be bandied around. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll listen. And I'm not on board, but I will definitely listen, because there's nothing wrong with listening to information you don't agree with, because then you get to evaluate it. But for me, this is what I came to. Given what I have learned about evolution and the way that selection works, for me to believe there are absolutely zero cognitive differences between populations evolving in a specific geographic area with distinct developed cultures faced with specific ongoing environmental pressures and heterozygous versus homozygous data in areas like geographically isolated areas, I would essentially have to throw out evolution. I would essentially have to throw out everything I had learned about evolution and genetics and say, this is how it works for every other animal, but for humans, for some reason, it doesn't affect us because we are magical.
So well, evolution stops at the next, don't you know? That's how it works.
And I couldn't do it. So that's when I had to go, well, I don't know what to do with this information, if do anything with it. What's to do about it? But you can definitely look at it and go, yeah, okay. And a quick note on selection pressures and stuff. I'm assuming that your audience, from what I know of them, are pretty smart cookies. So I probably do not need to explain this. But I hope that people understand.
Yes, you do.
I hope that it's well understood. Selection doesn't tend to favor smart animals. Okay, it doesn't. But at its core, selection does not favor intelligence per se. What it does favor is animals that are smart for that specific environment.
Yes.
Right. So their suite of cognitive abilities is optimized for where they are. And this is not really an idea that's in debate. It's a core biological tenet that evolution does not always make things better. It makes them better adapted for where they are. So, yeah. People understand that. It's adaptation to the environment. Yeah. And when it comes to populations, again, there are geographical factors. There are in animals. There's going to be in humans too.
Yep.
They're going to evolve different parts of their brain to solve different problems, subject to primarily their environment, at least way back in the Wayback Machine, and culturally now. I would say, I especially in the West, given that there's a certain norming. I mean, people don't think there's a norming because we still have really rich people and really poor people. But again, if you look back through the Wayback Machine, the difference between our rich and our poor is not the same as the difference between the rich and the poor, let's say in the age of the Black Plague, let's put it that way. Yeah. So let's keep some modern perspective. Here in Canada, even our most poor are still reasonably well fed. You know, there's still a way for them to get food. It's not the way it was. So we're in the civilized country here. But yeah. So emphasis on cognitive ability in historical populations. How much have you dug into that?
I really haven't actually done very much of that.
Because I think the next step toward putting the modern race realism and things like the bell curve in more perspective is, because again, we're using IQ metrics that are only 100 years old. And I would love to see a bigger evolutionary perspective taken on historical cultures and their achievements in things like art, music, technology, compared with ones that didn't, and correlate them. I have this image in my head of this gigantic data map going all the way back of different geographical populations and migration patterns and things like that. And when I first started thinking about this aspect of it, which is probably not an aspect that your brain would work toward, but stay with me. I know you're a history fan too. So when I was in school the first time, because I've been in school several years, but the first time I was in for metalwork, of course, and I had to take metal art history, and I started studying Scythian metalwork. I don't know if you're familiar with the Scythians.
By name only.
Okay. They were nomadic, Greek, Roman era sort of thing. But they didn't have a lot of technology, but they were the best metal craftspeople. Well, craftsmen, let's call it what it is. The women would not be doing that at that point, I don't think. Not in a nomadic culture where it was a hard life, but they made metalwork that we still can't duplicate. So when we're talking about IQ, not in terms of a 100-year-old test, which in the sphere of human evolution is, like I said, it's a blank. When we're looking at things that we could look to show a culture that did have an emphasis on intelligence. And we've already determined that artistic intelligence is not technically the same thing until you think back to that they had to take rocks and figure out how to make them into things. You know, they had to find ore, they had to figure out how to smelt it, they had to figure out how to work it with primitive tools. So when you've got a culture that primitive, that puts an emphasis on this kind of problem-solving ability, my conjecture, and I would love to see if I'm right or wrong, but I don't have the resources, but I think it would be great, would be to say, okay, so let's track their genetic line and see how it pans out against modern IQ metrics. I think that'd be cool. Because there have always been humans throughout human evolution who have been a bit above and beyond in terms of problem solving and survival, and not only survival, but conveniences so you can do other things. Does that make sense?
Yes, it actually kind of ties into, again, something which Jordan Peterson actually talks about in his lectures, the idea that you know, once you're kind of base part of the Maslow's hierarchy, obviously he doesn't refer to it as that, but basically, like, sort of once you've got all of that taken care of, that's kind of the only time that the higher functions of your brain actually sort of really switch on. Because obviously you've got kind of like the newly evolved parts versus the lizard brain, and it's only when the lizard brain is satiated, you know, you're not particularly hungry, you're not thirsty, you're not too hot or cold, you're not dying from exposure, you're reasonably comfortable, you know, you're not constantly on edge because everything is trying to kill you. That's when the higher learning and higher ability parts of your brain really sort of kick in. You know,
that's
and
cool.
you can actually
that's exactly what I'm getting at. And when you examine cultures that have never gotten beyond subsistence, because they've just never developed the technology or goal-oriented plans, conscientiousness even, in order to do these things, there isn't a lot of art and music.
Yeah,
and I know
they're too busy taking care of the lower tiers, so they can't really dilly-dally around doing the higher ones.
And but yeah, Scythians, go Scythians, look up their metalwork. For anyone who is curious about this sort of thing, they did amazing things, and they were basically nomadic desert people, and they turned out things that we can't make today. So not easily anyway. So I think that was pretty cool. And they're I believe genetically they're Asian. They have strongly Asian, sort of Indo-Eurasian, I think, something like that. But so I would love to scan forward and see how that pans out. And these are aspects of race realism I think would be very interesting to look into, because they could give us clues and benchmarks as a progressive society on which direction we should be going in, and put an emphasis on things like art and music, and put an emphasis on things like intellectualism. You know, let's bring intellectualism back to schools. That would be good. That'd be a good start. But
yeah, let's maybe not glorify twerky pop nonsense shit and actually try and sort of say, hey, here's a high bar. Who can get to the high bar and even exceed the high bar?
Yeah.
Let's reward those people. Let's reward some innovation rather than bland, boring repetition.
But we're not, and I'm going to poke the bear. I'm going to present something to you. I'm definitely being fitted for my Nazi uniform now.
Absolutely.
But here we go. Okay. So, have you heard about the phenomenon of anti-intellectualism in Black communities?
Yes.
Okay. So you are familiar with this, and it's not like a new thing.
Nope.
And essentially, if you put too much emphasis on being intelligent, you are accused of being white. And I have read that from several people and I've seen it happen. You know, who do you think you are? And, you know, why are you spending so much time on that? And I think, this is what my brain tells me, that we're going to continue to see a decline, or I shouldn't say decline. We're going to continue to see racial IQ differences polarize, as long as there are parts of those communities that are frankly anti-intellectual, that do not value intelligence. You know, when's the last time you heard a rap song, right? That was like, driving in my car with my big, big brain. Got me some bitches gonna play us a game. Black against white with my card from Mensa. Gonna kill you all with my Kasparov Defensa. You know, when's the last time you heard that?
Yeah,
never. Never, right? So, and I apologize to the chat who's now cringing, but seriously. So I think it would be better, rather than getting butthurt about these racial metrics, why not we work on anti-intellectualism?
Yeah, it would be a very good way of doing it. And I mean, I suppose there's going to be people out there who are going to try and posit it's like, oh, if you focus on like intellectualism, that's a form of eugenics because dumb people will be less desirable for the breeding and derp. It's no, it's look, people do that anyway. So I mean, why would trying to shift the social focus to something that would be more beneficial, why would that be a bad thing?
Speaking of talking about beneficial things, are we going to talk about cousin fucking now?
Yes, let's talk about consanguinity.
Yay! Cousin fucking. There you go. Yes. Oh gosh. Yeah, I am a big consanguinity makes me insane. It's a bête noire for me. It is such a bad idea. It is such a bad idea to make babies with blood relatives. So,
yes.
Yeah. But again, are humans different? Because, you know, we see what happens in, say, wolf populations when inbreeding runs rampant. But with humans, we're different somehow, are we? No, it's bad. Okay.
But Bunny, so, it's love. Who are you to stand in the way of love?
Cheers, genetic sexual attraction, man. Yeah. Yeah, don't make
all
babies.
That shit. Failing that, there's the good old, how dare you define the will of that god whose name starts with A.
Oh.
Yes. It is his will. How very dare you.
How very dare I? Oh, I dare. I do dare. I do. But yeah, cousin fucking. So yeah, because we're talking about IQ and geographic and cultural populations.
Yep.
And we talked about cultural practices that perhaps will not improve the overall cognitive ability of a population. And this is probably one of the biggest ones, in my opinion.
Yes, it really is, especially when you even witness the practice being imported into certain countries, and then it's kind of like, yeah, what a surprise that this population that's importing this thing is fucking retarded. You know, they weren't retarded like 20 or 30 years ago when they came over to the country, because they were the smart people from those countries who left those countries because they realized that life in, say, a Western country was better. And because they were smarter, they realized that, you know, diddling your cousin's fiddle was not the way of going about things. So they didn't. So their populations integrated and did fairly well because they weren't being stunted by this. And then, 20, 30 years later, well, we start to have the less intelligent people following in the path of the trailblazers because they were the smart ones who showed that it could be done. So now we start getting all of the really crap practices that the idiots deal in, like marrying your cousins. What a surprise that the populations then see a distinct decline when that happens. Not only are you getting more stupid people as they move here, but then they're perpetuating stupid people by dicking their cousins.
And this is why I think race realism talks and IQ, stuff like this, that's why I think it's important and useful and is not racist dog whistling. What if by examining these things, we can put things in place to prevent these things from happening, to prevent this backward slide? You know, because have you looked at the mortality rates?
High.
Oh, it breaks my heart. I can't, the mortality rates I'm talking about infant mortality rates, obviously. And it's insane. Why do you continue to do this when you see the results? Like, why? Oh.
God wills it.
God wills it. There you go. Yeah, God wants your baby born with like 14 fingers, I'm sure. There you go. Sorry, I have zero respect for this practice. So, yeah. And it is what it is. So, but can people, in intellectual honesty, okay, we've done the baby steps. We know how selection pressures work. We know it's a response of a genetic interaction with the environment, and we know about heredity, and we know the difference between, what we would consider heritable and what we would consider Lamarckian. We've done all this. We know we can measure cognitive ability. We've checked off all these baby step boxes, and it was important to me that we went through them, because I think the best way of refuting a lot of some of the criticisms of IQ are quite valid and open the door for more learnings with the big brain, but some of it is just bullshit. And opening the baby steps. Okay, we've gone through step 1, check. 1 leads to 2. Okay, check. We've done all this. But if we put all this information together, good things could come out of it.
Yeah, some very good things. Because we know that, if IQ is largely heritable, which it is, you want to be breeding smart. That's one way of looking at it. You know that there is some environmental impact, especially in younger children. So socially, we should ideally then be making changes to encourage the raising of IQ in the times that the children are most malleable, which is under 6, as we've discussed here, but we can continue up to puberty, basically. So anything under puberty is pretty fair game, but under 6 is kind of like the golden time.
Yeah.
So there's that. We can eliminate rather than capitulate to people fucking their cousins.
Yeah, can we not do that? I mean, especially in a national healthcare system where you have to pay for that. You have to pay for all of the problems.
Yeah, and that's just fucking awful, frankly, I think. And we know that IQ is basically the best predictor of just your general success in life.
And, because it is based on a wide network of principles that are effectively attempting to measure data synthesis and problem solving.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. So we know that that's the thing, so we know that basically make your nation smarter should be the goal. Anything that stops your nation from getting smarter should be discouraged, or anything that, even worse, regresses it to being more stupid as a whole. It should be something that you avoid. So, with all of that in mind, there's a lot of really cool things that you can do there. I mean, I don't know, maybe you could try and incentivize smart people having kids. No idea how you'd go about doing that, but I'm sure some people would have some ideas.
Public shaming. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm quite serious. I am.
Oh yeah, ridicule is a very strong weapon.
And I'm not talking about ridiculing the people who can't tie their shoes. I feel bad for them. It's not their fault. You're born with what you're born with. I mean, when you see if I see my best girlfriend and she wants to make a baby with this really gorgeous guy who chicken of the sea, sort of Jessica Simpson version, that sort of stuff, I'm going to say, are you an idiot? Your baby going to be dumb. Don't do this. And I think we need to bring back and your family used to be the ones to do this, right? It would be your mother going, don't even think about it. Or your father saying, this is a bad idea, son.
Yep.
Because if you get into trouble, she is not going to be smart enough to help you in the ways you need help. But you can't say that anymore because, again, you hurt people's feelings. But I'm a big believer in public shaming for this kind of thing. And not them necessarily, but people making bad decisions about who they have babies with. What are you thinking? Don't make a baby with that person. Are you kidding me? You see it on Judge Judy all the time. Like, do you have any children? Keep it that way.
Yeah.
Keep your knees together.
Also, the thing is, humans actually work really counter to that, because actually as IQ raises, people become less concerned about having kids. Which is a very sort of interesting phenomenon, probably because they can actually see all of the various problems with having kids and how it would impact their lives and whatnot. And generally smarter people will sort of be more successful career-wise, which will generally lead to you know, longer hours and harder jobs and things that they need to just decompress from for longer. So it's kind of something that works counter to how you'd really sort of want a geographical area to function. You know, smart people just basically sort of self-select out, or if they do have kids, it tends to be smaller in number. But, you know, stupid people, or less intelligent people, we should say, lower IQ people, we should say, tend to not have those sorts of concerns. So they tend to be the ones who pop out. You know, they're the sort of typical 4 kids, 4 dads kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, and I should probably point out, we didn't say this explicitly, but you can have a high IQ and still be kind of dumb. So in other ways, just so that's out there. You can have a really high IQ and not know how to talk to people,
yes.
Which, yeah,
well,
which is not
because
intelligence.
Talking to people is the personality.
Exactly. So, but I just wanted to remind people that we said that earlier.
Yeah,
you know, so.
I know. Well, I suppose it does help to stick a load of reminders in here, because, as I highly suspect is going to happen, anyone who would want to argue against this will ignore the first half and just sort of focus on this half and quote mine the bits that they want out of this, and, well, then I suppose my inevitable response will be, here's what I said an hour earlier. It disproves what you said. Well done. You're just brilliant.
Well, people, of course, there's no way to qualify everything, and in fact doing that is really frustrating to the audience, because it's like, well, I'm saying this but not all, but just so you know, and just say what you fucking mean. And I get there too sometimes as an audience member, but I also think there are some important points to qualify, because you know they're going to get taken out of context, and just having that in there, it also illustrates our perspective, I think, a little better, because both of us, I think sometimes we don't always show our work. And I mean, you show your citations work, but you don't always show your brain process. So it kind of reminds people, no, we're not coming at this from an angle of gas the juice, just reminding everybody, okay? We're coming at this from an angle that the information is solid and it is useful to continue to research it and not simply discount it.
Yes,
so,
especially when you're discounting it based on but my feels, and other people might feel bad, and yeah. And I invented this reason that IQ doesn't work that researchers came up with 40 years ago and dealt with. But I'm going to posit it now because reasons.
Exactly. Okay, I've covered all my points. Cousin fucking bad. We've gone over what selective pressures are and how they're a measure of being adapted to an environment and don't have a specific direction. Okay, check. Yeah, no, I'm pretty much good. I've pretty much said everything that I came here to say on the topic. To summarize my point of view, again, I think IQ in a professionally tested, controlled environment, I think it's a very useful metric. And I have questions about its application in things like law, like I said, especially when it's the difference between being killed or not. And I think more effort should be put into investigating that. But FYI, even then, it's mitigated because of the Flynn effect, right? So you'll be evaluated based on the year you took the test, and then it will be factored into the current regulations. Yeah. Because the Flynn effect essentially posits that a 1950s 100 is not the same as a 2017 100, which is quite correct, actually, because of the renorming I talked about every 15 to 20 years.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't think we called for genocide. That's a good. I have that here. Bunny, remember, no genocide. So that's good. We avoided that. Yes.
Good.
I got to rap on the air as a white girl. That was pretty good. I was happy to do that.
Yep, that's good. So yeah, I think I've also covered everything. I've done the brain is inextricably linked from biology. You can't get around it because here are all of the reasons. Covered the heritability of IQ and the heritability of the Big Five personality traits. We've covered the Big Five personality traits. We've covered the Wilson effect, which is the IQ increasing inheritability as you age, that sort of interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've done beginning to isolate the genes which impact intelligence, so we're doing that. We've done how personality is not intelligence, and how listing personality traits does not disprove IQ or anything like that, because that's already been dealt with.
Yep.
We've covered how IQ tests are formulated. We've done the various branches and batteries of IQ tests. Yeah, I think we're good. And then we've done the whole race and IQ thing, which I think we've covered pretty well. It's, nope, here are means. You can't judge everyone in the population by the mean, because that's not how a mean works.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if you're really concerned about that sort of thing, have a cutoff point for IQ and just say, hey, everyone above this point of IQ, they're probably going to be all right because of self-practiced segregation in humans.
Oh, did we emphasize? Oh, I have another note that I just saw. My writing is bad. Did we emphasize that when we're talking about IQ, we're not giving it a moral value? Did we talk about that? Did we again, shouldn't this should be implicit, right? That obviously we're not saying that having a high IQ makes you an inherently better human being, right?
Yeah, I think just hammer that disclaimer in here. It's, yes, at no point is this saying high IQ is somehow, you know, inherently better than low or anything like that. It's not saying you're better or worse for whatever your score is.
It's just predictive and probable, right?
Yeah.
It is what it, and we talked about things being predictive, and it's a measure of probability. It is not a guarantee or a condemnation. Okay, good.
All right.
Yay! Little bit of trivia. Okay. What is the average IQ range of serial killers? Do you know this? It'll blow your mind.
I would imagine it's actually pretty high, because I know a lot of people who are incarcerated for murder are always very, very creative with how they come up with new kinds of tool to murder other inmates and things like that. So I'd imagine it's probably going to be like 120 or something, or maybe even higher.
Shockingly, it's mid-90s. I kid you not. It's average. It's less than average. It's literally the guy next door, not the professor. I know. I know.
I actually would have thought that maybe they'd be higher because of that, but
you hear
something new.
Yeah, you hear about the high IQ ones and with the Hannibal Lecter thing, but they're actually like, they're just average people who like to serial kill. So yeah,
that's pretty interesting. Things have been learned.
Or the serial killers with the high IQs are the ones that haven't been caught. There's also that thing.
Yeah,
you know?
that is a possibility as well. Yes. So we've done the whole genetic population IQ thing. What is mean? What is bell curve? Herpy derp. One thing which I would like to bring up, which I kind of touched on at the end of my segment, which was people using. They'll use demographic differences when it comes to, say, men and women to explain the ratios of CEO, but they won't. When you start applying it to other things, they start getting tetchy, and suddenly they don't like the very same method that they just used. IQ distribution between men and women is different. Women's bell curve is taller than men's bell curve. Men's bell curve is more flattened out and has higher far extreme ends. So what that means is women are more highly clustered around the average, and that there are fewer numbers of female complete morons, but also fewer like complete female geniuses. What that means is that men are less clustered around the mean, but that's also then why, you know, imagine like the dumbest person you know, I'm going to say like 99% of you it's a man, and think of the smartest person you know, again, I'm going to guarantee it's like 99% of them it's going to be a man as well, because men are overrepresented at both extremes and less represented in the middle. So that kind of explains, like, when you look at sort of really extreme stupid things, like how many of the Darwin Awards go to men compared to women, what a surprise. And again, you look at the number of men who are in, say, Mensa or get Genius Awards, Nobel Prize winners and whatnot, what a surprise, there's more men than women. That's the payoff. And I think this largely goes down to, well, just the quirk of how humans reproduce, that men are kind of where a lot more of the testing is done. generally.
Do you think? I'd never thought of that angle.
Well, I would think that that's the case, because obviously men have to be the ones who kind of do all the provisioning, and they do generally a lot more of the approach and dance and things like that, so kind of a wider variety of things there ensures a wider variety of strategies attempted.
Oh, I see what you're getting at now. I thought you meant that they were actually physically tested. And
oh, no.
Oh, because everything I've read has been pretty much down the line. So I was like, huh. But now I see what you're saying. Oh, no. What you're essentially presenting, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that men have had a greater burden of things that would require that kind of cognitive ability.
Yes.
And we're talking evolutionary, the grand history, not just the 100 years IQ tests have been around.
Yes.
So, oh yeah, I would tend to agree completely. And maybe for another show, I would love to also see how what the correlation between risk taking and IQ in men is. Like, what do you know what I mean?
That would be a fun one,
right? That'd be juicy. That'd be great. Because instinct would tell me that risk taking would be associated with low IQ, but that doesn't make sense from an evolutionary perspective, because risk taking, he who dares wins sometimes. So I think it would be really interesting to look at. That's
partially why there's more male homeless and more CEOs.
Yes, yeah, I think it would be great to look at those two and overlap them, but. Anyway, just a thought. Right?
I wouldn't be surprised if risk taking was fairly consistent. In fact, I might suggest that it would possibly be an inverse bell curve. That maybe around the average it's less and higher and lower towards stupider
I see what
and
you're
smarter.
Saying.
Because they might be the ones who take the risk, which is why they fail more and succeed more.
Perhaps. God, now I want to map this out. I really do.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting one. I will see if there is anything, because that's actually a really interesting one to think about. But I do believe that we're both basically we are finished.
I want to have a beer and pat myself on the back for coming out of the wilds briefly. Thanks for dragging me out of my cave. But I'm going back into my cabin in the woods for a while.
Was it me that dragged you out of the cave, or was it really, really stupid drama and people saying the most retarded things imaginable that are just on the face of it completely false, but for some reason people are eating it up like, oh, it's a thing. Look, this one guy's holding a textbook when he's saying stuff to me. That means it must be true. No. He read about a dozen pages out of it and then pulled the rest of it out of some orifice.
And this is what I was saying. You can find one tiny little snippet that will totally support your point of view, but if you don't put it in the context, yeah. So, like I said, the learning disability thing. I can prove to you that IQ is bad for learning disabilities, and I can also prove to you that it's good for learning disabilities. So what the fuck am I even talking about? Have I come to a conclusion? Have I read everything? Do I even know? No. You have to look at stuff you don't like. That's all I'm saying. You have to look at stuff that doesn't support you. And, yeah.
Yeah, well, in this case, it would seem that for all of the rationality and skepticism on display, that the stuff that disagrees is far more and far better researched and far more verified and just more correct.
But from a certain slant of light, though, if it makes them sleep better at night to say, well, IQ is just bullshit, and they can still consider themselves scientifically minded, even though they've just made that sweeping statement with no qualifiers or context at all, then okay, you tell yourself that. Okay.
Yeah, you go for it. I can't help but think that maybe some of it was triggered by the fact that maybe they took an online IQ test and didn't get the number they wanted.
Oh, so, ouch. That's true.
Gotta wonder.
Oh, God. Most of the time on the online IQ test, people actually get really inflated numbers. Yeah. And because there's no,
But maybe it wasn't as inflated as they thought it should be.
Oh.
No, I'm totally a 130, 140 genius. How dare you say that I'm only like 120?
Well, not everyone's antlers can be as big as yours, Steele.
No, it is true. It is true.
Because they grow directly out of your brain, I'm quite sure.
It is possible. I really should get an X-ray.
Yeah. And on that note,
yes.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I'm going back to being a total non-entity in my cave now. But if I had to come out of my cave, I am happy to be here discussing it with you because I always learn things, and I'm happy to be discussing something that I actually feel pretty passionate about this. I'm officially irritated at the amount of misinformation and myths about IQ. Because I keep hearing them over and over again. The biggest one, of course, being you can study for an IQ test. I'm like, not if it's done. You're not supposed to be able to. That defeats the point. That's all. Yeah. So have you looked into why it was developed? No, you haven't. Okay. Anyway, but no. So I was very happy to come and flap my gums about this, and I got to say cousin fucking. I just said it again. It's a happy word to say on the air.
It's an academic term because we are, after all, both anal theorists.
Like thingado?
Yes. Well, we're anal theorists, so the language of fucking is actually a technical term for us. I'm
wearing my anal theorist shirt.
There you go.
In honor of today, I actually got one. That you remember one of the fans of your stream actually had them made. I bought one. I
really should get myself one of them as well, just for fun.
It gets me some looks when I'm out. That's all I'm saying. So, but it's fun.
So look, you just don't understand modern academia, bro.
Yeah, this is a super serious t-shirt, and you have not looked through my black anal window.
Yeah, you're just an uneducated pleb. That's all you are.
Are you trying to ghettoize My Little Pink Rosebud? That's what you're doing. That's yeah. And we could do this for way too long as the chat goes, oh god, it's disgusting. Okay.
Well, no, chat will it'll just make them very enthusiastic to go back and listen to the Anal Theorist stream again. So I'm totally okay with us encouraging them to do that because, hey, I've got to get that ad revenue.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad we did something more serious, although I did have my sock ready in case I had another giggle fit, because it tends to happen around you. So.
Fair enough. But who knows, maybe next time we could do something silly so it can come back.
We should do, oh gosh, there's so many silly things kicking around that we could do right now. We have a surfeit. Yeah. So, thank you again for having me.
It was
chat.
Fun.
So
it's been therapeutic.
For me too. I'm happy to talk about something that is academic, and I was happy to research it, and it's something that I know a little bit about, but especially from the other side of the table, right? Because I went through these tests, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what they are. So I was happy to get to talk about that a little bit. No, I'm not talking about the number I got on my IQ. That is irrelevant. But it's not irrelevant that I did actually undergo years of this bullshit. So yes, and it wasn't bullshit. And honestly, I'll finish off with having all this IQ and cognitive testing done. I don't think it helped me. It didn't help me self-esteem wise, because I didn't, like I said, I wasn't really told what any of it meant. My parents were given the recommendation for me. But knowing what I know now, I think it gave me a love of trying to figure things out, and that is actually a skill. So yeah, so I'm glad I went through them.
Yeah, it's just given an extra perspective on the things, which is actually sort of really good, because I don't actually know anyone else who's gone through the full battery of all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I've gone through 3 IQ tests in my life, and oh, what a surprise, they were all pretty much the same result, and there was no way in hell I could have studied for them.
Yeah, exactly.
What a surprise. So I was looking at them just like, if I get it, I get it, but if I don't, I just don't get it. So
yeah, and I'm trying to explain some of the questions. I don't remember all of it, of course. I mean, I was friggin' 4. I don't remember everything from that far back. But some of the questions were like, imagine a pyramid in front of you. It's a square-based pyramid. Now flatten that pyramid out and draw the shape. It's things like that. And you have to do it pretty much on the first try. That's the difference. It's not like you're told you're going to learn how to do that, and you learn how to do it, and then you go and you do it. You have to do it right then. And if you can't do it, you can't do it. or fold a piece of paper in. It's the same kind of thing. Fold a piece of paper twice, make 2 cuts with a pair of scissors. Can you make a cross? Can you spatially remember and figure out where the fold lines are? It's things like that. And that kind of problem solving, that raw problem solving, I think is useful. So and people with high IQ are the people who can pretty much pick up anything they try to. And they're the annoying people that everybody hates, right? Because, oh, I didn't take piano lessons. I just saw a piano and sat down at it and figured out how to play it. Yeah, we hate those people, you know? It's true. It's true. They're annoying. Or those people who, yeah, well, I have a 4.0, but I don't study. Yeah, I hate you. So, but it is a thing. There we go. All right.
Okay, we are done. I'm not going to drag this out any longer.
Yep.
I shall hit the stop streaming button. But I suppose I'm just going to say thank you, Bunny, for being here. It has been fun, and thank you, chat, for all of the attendance and the things. And I'm going to probably go back and rewatch this just to sort of see how it all turned out. And I'm going to read all of the OTP fan shipping in the chat that is inevitably there that I've not been looking at.
But it has to be with both of us in our SS uniforms. That's my only request. It has to be.
There will be fan art of that now that you've said that. You are aware of that.
Oh, yes. Can't wait.
We complain about it, but we equally encourage it.
Oh, it's fun and it's clever and it's, yeah, I appreciate it. Even the jokes made at my expense. I still appreciate them.
Yes. I do also feel this way, except for, well, some of the fan art is, you look at it and you're like, thanks? That is the one which really got that was, well, unsurprisingly, it involved a teal deer and a rabbit and insertion.
Sodomy. Yeah, there you go. Hey, I got to say sodomy too. Cousin fucking and sodomy. Awesome. I love your streams.
Yes, it was just, yeah, insertion that borderlined on vor. Yes,
oh God.
So I'm sure it wasn't the bunny having the things inserted.
Oh no!
All you could see was a pair of legs.
We're getting into Sonic Mpreg now. I gotta go.
Yes,
this is too much even for me.
It's terrible.
Okay.
If I could, can I find the horrendous Sonic ear rape to play out? You won't be able to hear it, but the chat will. So I've got to do it. It's going to be like 5 or 10 seconds because this is the borderline. And then I'm going to hit the stop button. So, thank you everyone, and fare thee well.